When trying to analyze art, we often focus on the story to understand what we are faced with. That is most particularly true in writing. The meaning behind dialogues and actions and descriptions, revealing the themes and hidden depths. Such a thing is impossible when facing a painting. With no story to rely on, we have to piece together the shapes, the colors, the subjects, fore and background, figures, poses, lighting, all coming together to form a narrative. In a temporal form of visual art, like comics, stage theatre, cinema or video games, it's both. The story doesn't stand on its own, and neither do the visuals. Both are built upon each other, explicit and symbolic woven together by the artist. And that is what we have to decipher if we want to understand the intent behind the art, the story that lies beneath the story. But Clair Obscur Expedition 33 stands out even among other art pieces of its own medium, by adding a new layer on top of this multi-leveled process of analysis. When the world of the story is itself a piece of art within the story, when the characters are both creations and creators, when the fictional world we dive into is fiction even within itself, we must study the painting if we are to understand the painters. And, in the case of Clair Obscur, the painters are the Dessendre family. The Dessendre were a wealthy family in the early 20th century Paris. They lived in an opulent manor close to the Eiffel Tower, with a sizable garden as part of their domain. They belonged to a group known as the painters, who possessed the ability to turn their canvases into living, breathing worlds, which they could freely enter, wielding the chroma, the paint of the canvas, to create wonders. The Dessendre were important even among the painters, as Hélène, the matriarch of the family, was the head of the Painters' Council. Hélène was exceptionally skilled, possibly the greatest paintress in the world, and she taught her craft to her husband Renoir. Hélène and Renoir would hone their mastery over chroma together through the creation of hundreds of canvas worlds, a life of art spent together. It's therefore no surprise, given their status and fascinations, that they taught their 3 children to paint from a young age. The Dessendre were a family of artists and didn't restrict themselves to the singular field of painting. Hélène, for instance, was a ballet dancer. Her and Renoir's oldest daughter Claire was a sculptor, and their youngest, Alicia, preferred the world of books and writing, and was also a fencer. Their son Verso, meanwhile, had a passion for music, and was, like his mother, a pianist. Hélène and Verso weren't the only musicians among the Dessendre, however. All of them were. Claire played the harp and Renoir the guitar, which he also taught Verso, while Alicia was a violinist. At least one of them also played the accordion, likely Hélène or Verso. Hélène had very high expectations for her children and was very strict in their upbringing, that being in her painting lessons or otherwise. But despite that and their occasional quarrels, all members of the family were bound by a deep and sincere love for each other. Our story begins with a little boy, Verso Dessendre. Verso had a boundless imagination, and when his parents gifted him his first canvas, he painted it with a world of wonder and whimsy. From the wooden gestural figures his parents used as a reference for their creations, and from the tip of their brushes, Verso painted the Gestrals, a race of goofy masked beings of all shapes and sizes with a passion for fighting, competing to build the largest and most powerful potato sack pillow mechs, the sac à patates. Even the smallest of Gestrals had the ability to contend with stronger opponents, as Verso painted them with the ability to grow several times their original size. The Gestrals were led by Golgra, the mightiest of them all, the bossy, implacable yet caring chief of their village, who was possibly made to resemble how he perceived his big sister or his mother, or even maybe the manor's chef or nursemaid. Drawing inspiration from his most loyal companions in the real world, Verso painted the Gestrals Monoko and later Noko in the likeness of the Dessendre family's 2 dogs, to be able to go on adventures with them. The bell on the dog's colors would become the symbol of the Gestrals and Verso's creations, featured in most of their structures. As an homage to Monoko's joyful feet-nibbling habits, Verso granted him the ability to turn into other creatures if he managed to get their feet, thus prompting the beginning of Monoko's notorious foot collection. Meanwhile, Noko inherited the eagerness and curiosity of his canine counterpart, as well as his sharp nose and affinity for searching. The concept of death and mortality may have been foreign to him, and so when the real Monoko passed away and the family bought a new dog to replace him, Verso painted the sacred river. Whenever a gestural was broken, they could be brought to the river with a chroma offering, where they could be reborn, though a part of them would be forever lost. This created a cycle of sorts for Noko, Monoko and the other gesturals. When one was broken, he was raised by the other, who he would raise in turn after his death. It also had the consequence of rendering the rest of the gesturals more welcoming of death, as for them it wouldn't be final, but Verso didn't perceive it as grim, rather hopeful. Verso believed in the excitement of new beginnings, and saw the sacred river as a gift to the gesturals. It's also to be noted that gesturals awaiting rebirth were planted as trees in the landscape, giving them a new purpose, and in a way new life, even in death. They were also sometimes used as weapons for Sakapetats, but always with a certain eagerness. To balance out the outward goofiness and simplicity of the gesturals' minds, Verso painted the Grandis, tall furry figures with a stone owl-like mask instead of eyes, and gave them a home high in the mountains. Contrary to the gesturals, the Grandis appeared very intellectual, and believed eloquence would triumph over physical might. The Grandis were a peaceful species, almost to an extreme, and it's likely that Verso's child eyes viewed them as the pinnacle of wisdom and sophistication. But Verso wasn't the only painter in his canvas. He had another playmate, his older sister Clair. The two of them were inseparable and would spend most of their time in the canvas together, playing and painting and going on adventures. Verso painted for them the most powerful beings in the canvas, both inspired by their respective best friends. To honor the companion that reassured him in the dark and appeased his nights, Verso painted a benevolent creature who fed on light, Esquier. Esquier was modeled after Verso's stuffed toy, a gigantic soft body topped by a small joyful mask, and would always comfort those who became consumed by their fears and dark thoughts. Like the gesturals, Esquier possessed the ability to grow several times his original size. He could also fly and swim, and Verso gifted him a set of magical rocks so that he could carry them on their adventures. First Sori, then Flori, Dori, and Uri. Rocks he'd always end up losing, so that they had an excuse to go on more and more adventures. Verso painted Esquier's nest in the likeness of Esquier himself, and filled it with magical glowing mushrooms and countless statues representing Esquier. And for Claire, Verso painted her own best friend into the canvas, her pet turtle François. He gave him a room in Esquier's nest, a small mask head and a stone-like body, and the strongest ice attack ever. When François got jealous of Esquier's rocks, Claire gave him a set of his own, though that wouldn't stop François from stealing them from his neighbor. Claire, Esquier, Verso and François would sing and dance and have fun together, and go on all sorts of adventures with Monoko and Noko. Aline and Renoir would even sometimes join them, lending themselves to the games their children created. Verso's hideout and safe haven within the canvas was a place that served as his drafts, a secret garden he could go to when he needed to escape, and where not even his sister was allowed. It was a paradise of childish bliss, full of flowers shaped like candy and Esquier, sunny beaches and waterfalls, and caverns of sweets and lollipops. Soon Verso's drafts became filled with toys and trains, with statues of Esquier and François, with rainbows and glowing incomplete gesturals. It was where he could freely push his fantasy to the extreme, and bring into existence even the wildest ideas from his imagination, giving birth to a plethora of strange creatures. Copies of François, either with horns on their heads to make them into licorne, or as heads themselves on top of a gestural body to form the frontale. A group of Grandis he named Barba-Sucette, dual-wielding lollipops and summoning candies to protect themselves, gesturals walking on two wheels made of feet, the machine à pied, and even a mixture of all these things with the licorne à pied. Shortly after his sister Alicia's birth, when the Dessendre built a treehouse in their garden, Verso incorporated it into his drafts and covered it entirely with drawings of memories with his family, learning music with his mother, discovering the world with his father, watching from the door the hard work of Claire, playing with and entertaining baby Alicia, running outside with Monoko, and, of course, going on adventures with Esquier. He painted a piano on the balcony of the treehouse, from where he could play, surrounded by his dreamed paradise. But Verso's drafts were also home to a terrifying place, the root of all evil, the lair of a most dastardly villain, Oskio, an evil version of Esquier, and a worthy opponent for the two adventurers of legend. But Oskio alone wasn't enough, and the heroes needed a larger variety of adversaries. While Verso had painted their adventure companions, Clair painted those who would oppose them. One of her first creations was the giant automaton Sprong, who had a limited preset of moves that included a powerful destruction boom. She painted a silly-looking marble face being named Grosse Tête that would repeatedly bounce at its opponents. Clair painted the cowardly Pétanque, who gave generous rewards when caught on their plinth, and Verso painted the expressionless and timid mimes that held various items of fashion behind their invisible wall. One of the creations Clair was the proudest of was a creature she named Gobelou, one similar in appearance to Verso's Esquier, who would only attack when its patch of flowers was threatened. Clair's painting of Gobelou even earned its spot on the Dessendre manor's wall, having been judged worthy enough, even by Eline's tough standards. Similarly, Verso's painting of Esquier would also find its place on the wall. Eventually, the two siblings would design a game called the Gauntlet. Using a canvas within the canvas, they could fight wave after wave of powerful enemies, all without real risk of harm. To host the Gauntlet, Clair painted the titanic Endless Tower, that stretched from the ground all the way to the sky, where she would be free to create and paint, each layer representing a level of the Gauntlet. And so, even though the canvas belonged to Verso and was animated by a fragment of his soul, it was one of Clair's creations that stood the tallest within it. Clair had inherited her mother's high standards, and being the oldest child, she was faced with higher expectations from her parents. But she didn't let herself be crushed by that overwhelming weight, instead rising to the challenge. Growing up, she developed a striving for perfection, expecting only the best from herself. She was pushed, and she pushed herself, refining her skills, mastering everything she possibly could. She was incredibly inquisitive and curious about the world and the stories around her. She let herself be inspired by all the fables she learned of, bringing each of them to life in her workshop. Even her own mortality didn't scare her per se. She was instead saddened that there were more works of art than she could possibly discover, and that she wouldn't be able to experience all the beauty in the world within her lifetime. Clair had a real passion for art, and became an exceptionally talented and prolific painter, each of her creations varying drastically from the others, each of them its own style, each of them a story she'd collected. Eventually, even painting itself wasn't enough for her, and she took up sculpture with the help of her father Renoir, who taught her to mold and shape clay, until eventually she mastered that field too. Her subtle hands gave birth to dozens of different art pieces, paintings and sculpted figures that lined the walls of her room, atelier and gallery in the manor. The dexterity of her deft fingers would even be further developed when she became a harpist, the only one in her family. Everything she set her eyes to appeared to be within her grasp, and it would almost seem like she could even reach the perfection she so sought. While Verso saw his canvas as a place where he could play and have fun, every painting a celebration, Clair also saw it as a way to refine her craft. Her residence and atelier within the canvas, aside from the Endless Tower, was the Flying Manor, wherein stood a number of her drafts, and where she, Verso, and the others would often play. Clair also had her own workshop, a canvas within the canvas, where she'd be free to experiment with chroma without fear of destroying her brother's world. She also had a secondary workshop in the Frozen Hearts, inside the icy caverns near the Grandest home, where she would practice her sculpting. Clair's efforts were unending, her strides to transcend her parents' expectations ceaseless. She was talented and accomplished, immeasurably so, just like they hoped she would be. But still, she saw it. How couldn't she? Despite everything, all she'd done, all she'd learned and mastered, it was never enough to earn her mother's praise. Verso was the center of Aline's attention, her favoritism impossible to hide. Clair was overcome by righteous jealousy in the face of her own mother's unfairness. She retreated in her painting workshop, and she painted. She gave herself away to her raging emotions, her paintbrush filled with darkness. Her spite, her skill, her rage, her love woven together in harmonious chaos, a mesh of light, color and shape. She painted, she sculpted, she composed. Her pride, her skilled hands, the pinnacle of her craft, she incorporated them into her creation. The beast's roar, her voice. Verso was afraid of the dark, so he'd confided to her. That was the reason he painted Esquier. Well, so be it. She too would paint a creature of light, made to undermine him. A creature who hid in darkness, wielding light as a terrifying weapon, beautiful and deadly, spectral radiance. An incarnation of terror and death. The trial she embedded within, victory through darkness, would serve as a lesson and a test of courage, forcing her brother to get over his fears if he were to defeat this cursed being. Clair laid the trail, lanterns in the dark, that would inevitably lure Verso to her creation's lair, a forgotten cave in the stone-wave cliffs, basked in darkness. Deceitful lights, the closing fangs of her monster. In the depths where shadows sigh, lurks a beast beneath the sky. The Lampmaster was Clair's masterpiece, a perfect mix of emotion, meaning and creativity, a ghost story given life. Art. It terrified Verso, just as intended, but it proved too effective. Even outside the canvas, the boy's dreams were plagued with horrific nightmares, ones that, by design, even Esquier could do nothing against. It was maybe out of love then, or shame, or even disappointment. In the end, it matters little. Clair took apart the refined version of her creation in the painting workshop, sealing the nightmare she'd conjured in a place she'd never return. I believe it's around this time that Clair started to stop entering the canvas as often, her visitations growing fewer and fewer. And eventually, something terrible happened to her. She grew up. She left this playground she shared with her brother for good, leaving this world behind. This broke François' heart, and he would never be the same. He stopped singing when she left, his sadness making him ever grumpier as he waited every day for a best friend that would never return. In the end, Verso never completed the lamp trial and couldn't bring himself to face his fear. The Lampmaster kept prowling the stone-wave cliffs, and the broken conception Clair was working on in her painting workshop, terrifying improvements to a creature of darkness, would, despite the seal in its incomplete state, keep on haunting the soul of the canvas. Eventually Verso grew up too, and though he never fully stopped visiting the canvas, he had his own life to think about and couldn't afford to spend as much time in his fantasy world. Verso never painted another canvas. Despite his parents' status and expectations, and though he did enjoy it in part, painting was not his true calling, nor was it his true passion. Even within his drafts, during his adventures, he was aware of it. The root of all evil, Obscur, the incarnation of everything villainous in his life, one he never managed to beat on his own, had spoken his deepest and most secret fear. He would have no choice but to paint, and he would never be a good musician. Verso's true love was piano. Music, the thrill of concert performances, not the stroke of a paintbrush on an empty canvas. It was an instrument he'd learned with his mother, but that now drove a wedge between them, as her expectations for him clashed with his own wants and ambitions. Verso quietly kept up appearances, hiding the reality of what he was feeling so as to appease those around him, keeping his world in harmony. His father could see his efforts to master truth, though he may not have really known what lay beneath. This leaves us with Alicia. Alicia had only seldom visited the canvas. The youngest Dessendre child would always decline her siblings' invitations to join them to play, preferring instead the solitude of her room. Alicia had no particular love for painting, and didn't believe she had any real talent for it. This opinion seemed shared by her mother, as Helene had only deigned to display one of Alicia's creations on the manor wall, a small piece representing the Dessendre family home, the only one deemed acceptable by Helene's standards. Though she did benefit from her father's support, Alicia's lack of passion and ambition still alienated her from her family, but her divergent interests were also a common trait she had with her brother Verso. Verso would write all kinds of silly songs for her, and the two would grow very close. While Alicia, like him, was a musician and played the violin, music wasn't her field of choice. Neither was fencing, though she practiced both. What she loved was staying hours in her room, losing herself in her books, and eventually in her writing. She turned the extension of her room, that was meant to be her atelier, into her very own library, and was the only one in the manor to possess a typewriter, which she even had two of. However, her reclusiveness and more reserved personality rendered her more isolated, and her life spent alone faced only with fiction had made her naive. And as she dove deeper and deeper into her passion, she was approached by a group known as the Writers. Now, it's unclear what the Writers' abilities were, if they even had any, nor do we know their real identity and motives, But regardless, we know that they made contact with Alicia. The writers and the painters were rival factions, but Alicia felt that the connections she had were real. She shared a kinship with the writers in a way she didn't with her family. She, who'd spent her entire life in loneliness, felt like she belonged. Alicia attempted to keep this connection a secret, which worked for a time, until at some point her mother got wind of it. Aline confronted her daughter, likely forbidding her from ever seeing the writers again. But for the first time, Alicia made a stand, defying her mother's authority, and the two had a fight. Alicia was left feeling angered and hurt and alone. Resentment filled her heart, overpowering reason, and she disobeyed her mother by going to those she considered her only friends. This proved to be a mistake. For Aline's fears and warnings were justified. The writers had duped Alicia, abusing her trust, her naivety, and her starving for connection. The exact circumstances of what follows are unknown, but the result is the same. Colors set ablaze, fiery red and life taken. Her world aflame, raging all around her, the searing heat consuming everything. Her faith misplaced, her friends lies, her home engulfed in fire. A fire of tragedy, a fire of betrayal. The writers had trapped her, lured her in, all to land a decisive blow to the leadership of the painters, the head of their council, the Dessendre family, her family. She'd been the weak link, the crack in their armor. She was the blow that would burn them to the ground. All these thoughts likely rushed through Alicia's mind as she watched the fire grow inside the manor, way too fast to be stopped, as she saw everything crumble around her, consumed by the inferno of her own folly, as she could only wait for the flame-scorching grasp that would finally take her life. Or that would have, if not for Verso. Her brother Verso, playful Verso, sneaky Verso, Verso who took her place at the heart of the fire, getting her out of harm's way. Stupid Verso who, as flames lapped around him, ensuring his doom, turned to look her in the eye and extended his hand, who, in his final moments, found nothing better to do than to give her a warm smile and to reassure her, "You're okay." And then blood and pain and screams, and it was all over. On December 33rd, 1905, aged only 26, Verso Dessendre died. Emptiness. All was naught but emptiness. There was no music, no talking. Silence now filled the manor halls, Alicia's gruesome cries of agony having finally come to an end as the melted flesh of her face had at long last started to scar. The girl had survived, but she would never be the same. None of them would. Alicia's right eye had been too badly damaged to save, and the burns she'd suffered had left her permanently disfigured. The fire had destroyed her throat, every breath she took coming with pain, her voice lost, her family broken. Claire, perfect Claire, had already started to plan retaliatory actions against the writers, preparing herself and the rest of the painters for the war that was brewing. She would get revenge. She'd stop at nothing to make them feel the extent of her wrath. She would inflict retribution for this affront to her family. She would avenge her brother's death and her sister's pain. Aline, proud and stoic Aline, icy cold Aline, was shattered. It is a terrible thing for a mother to lose her child. The head of the Painters' Council had always been above such matters of emotion, yet Aline could only find herself drowning in utter nothingness, in the endless void her life had become. She, who had been so distant, had been hit at her very core. Renoir, ever the family man, could see them all unraveling around him, but despite his best efforts to keep them all standing, to face this tragedy together, he too was grieving his son. And though he tried again and again to reach out to her, Aline was pushing him away to languish alone. His attempts at conversation were only met with further distance, and the two of them spent more and more time apart. Aline in her glass house above, lamenting memories that would never be, and Renoir in his atelier below, making sense of the chaos through his painting. The spectre of war was already looming, its toll already taken, and it is to confront it that Renoir had painted and sculpted the Création, a large horse-like being comprised of the bodies of the fallen. But now that senseless war had cut short the life of an innocent, his son, and torn his family apart. No matter how much he tried, how hard he reached, Aline was pulling away, their love struck by a fatal rift, and he was left alone to paint his grief away. And so he did. From his loneliness, he designed and painted the Aberration, two silhouettes both conjoined and opposed, split by a shared fateful sword planted in void. A being of two, formerly united, each now struggling alone in a fight they should share, a rendition of what had become of their love. Aline's grief overshadowed everything, every single part of her, and had plunged her into a deep depression. Her life had lost its colors, Verso's death had left her hollow and empty, and she found herself unable to feel even the faintest rage. The tragedy was seared into her, inescapable, as the mere sight of Alicia brought her back to her pain, the scars on her daughter's face acting as a mirror to her own suffering, reflecting it back tenfold, a constant reminder of the fire that stole her son, deepening the cut of his loss every time she laid eyes on her. And, despite herself, she was unable to quiet the pernicious voice in her head, the whispers telling her that this was all Alicia's fault, that she was the one who'd killed her Verso. Aline felt trapped within herself. Her family, her husband were both too close and too far away. There was only one person she wanted to see, and it was the one she would never see again. And so, eventually, she had an idea. It was a foolish idea, but maybe, just maybe, it could help numb the pain. She uncovered Verso's childhood canvas, the only one he ever made, that contained the last living fragment of his soul. Aline entered the canvas, and for the first time since the fire, she felt good. It was a way to be closer to her son, and it had worked. For a time. But it wasn't enough. Even within the canvas, the pain of his absence still haunted her. She was desperate. There was nothing else that could give her surcease, but even this solution seemed a temporary one, the peace she'd found already fading. Renoir was unable to comfort her, Claire was unwilling to, and she couldn't even bring herself to look at Alicia. She was alone, and she'd lost all hope. There was nothing she could do that could bring her son back. Or maybe there was. It would only be for a time, she told herself, but it would work, she knew it. She could bring color back into her life. She entered her son's canvas, and there, Aline committed a terrible sin. She made a miracle. A stroke of paintbrush and chroma, her life of dedication, all her skill put to use, and Aline, the paintress, did the unthinkable. Life. Sentient life, with emotions and thoughts and a conscience. Human life that could exist and develop independently from her will. She poured her heart and her memories into her work, and the result was her masterpiece. There, in front of her, was Verso. A painted copy, but living, breathing, feeling, that spoke with his voice and thought with his mind. Her son. Finally, she could live again. At first, that was it. But then it wasn't enough. She knew what Renoir would think, but it didn't matter anymore. Within Verso's canvas, she painted the rest of her family, as she perceived it, as she wished it were, a family that had survived the fire. She painted Renoir as the devoted father and husband she knew he was, with the grand and mighty figure she saw him with, a proud protector. But she also created him so that he would always be on her side, never willing to oppose her, and dressed him in their late son's dark suit. Perhaps as punishment for his real equivalent not being there for her when she needed him, or not being there in time to save Verso, Aline made him inherit the pain and grief she was feeling, ensuring he'd do everything in his power to make sure this version of her son survived. Aline painted Claire in a way she judged more preferable, but when it came to her youngest, she found herself unable to do the same. Aline painted Alicia with her gift for fencing and writing and poetry, but also with the scars and the memories inflicted by the fire. Maybe it was out of resentment for Verso's death, maybe she simply couldn't imagine her daughter without them, or maybe she still held on to the belief that this would help her accept what had happened. Whether it was by punishment or by weakness, Aline left her copy of Alicia unfinished, deprived of her colours, and the image of the spectre the fire had made of her daughter. Even within the painting, Aline remained unable to look at Alicia's face, and so she painted for her a mask to conceal the dreadful scars from her sight. Verso was the only one she left unmarred, a perfect depiction of who her son had been, both in surface and substance, in all his qualities and his flaws. In this painted life, the fire had spared him to claim only Alicia. Aline now had her perfect family within the canvas, but that too wasn't enough. So she kept painting. She painted the Dessendre manor, her home, where she could live with her painted family, a piece of familiarity in a world that wasn't hers. But that too wasn't enough, so the paintress took up her brush and kept painting. She recreated Paris, the entire city, the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower, hundreds upon hundreds of buildings, erecting statues of Verso in places of honor. She kept painting. She painted hundreds of thousands of people to populate her city, all breathing, feeling, thinking, with their own lives and their own emotions and conflicts and troubles, bringing countless sentient beings into existence, lives that weren't meant to be in a world where they didn't belong, or to have a backdrop for her dreamed fantasy. She made a capital at the center of her son's world, a fully fledged society in a city of light, where she'd be able to live the life that was stolen from her. Lumière. Renoir could see that every day his wife was spending even more time in the canvas, and every day she'd return even weaker from her descent within, and every day she'd grown even more distant. He could see her slipping away. He knew this would eventually cost Aline her life, that she was losing herself in her make-believe world, and that she was becoming too enthralled to be able to listen to reason. He knew, because he had himself lived it. Aline's temporary solution was growing more permanent, and he had to do something. With Claire away on her war and Alicia a ghost of herself, he was left with no other choice if he wanted to save his family. Renoir entered the canvas. Aline wasn't the only one to have made portraits of her family. Ever since the fire, and even before, Renoir too had been hard at work. But where she made idealized copies, he captured their essence, expressing it in layered lessons and metaphors. Renoir's strength was his family, they were his drive and his muse, and it is to honor them that he crafted the accents. 4 of them, 1 for each. For his firstborn, Claire, who filled him with endless pride, Renoir painted the hauler, she who carries the world. He depicted her as a titanic figure hauling a city on its back, Atlas carrying the heavens. As the oldest Dessendre child, Claire was burdened with greater expectations and responsibilities, which she took on by herself, even at the risk of being crushed by their weight. Even now, Claire was the only one taking action on behalf of her family, shouldering all their troubles alone. Through her accent, Renoir gave Claire what she had always wanted, to behold everything the world had to offer, all the while warning her about the cost one such desire could have upon her. The stories and fables Claire had always loved collecting were both an inspiration and part of her. She carried them with her everywhere she went, akin to the turtle she'd owned as a child, and, appropriately, the hauler's burden was as much a part of its body as it was a weapon. Throwing the buildings it carried at its opponents from a distance, the hauler, like Claire, defended Renoir without getting involved itself. For his son, his beloved and only son, Verso, Renoir painted Visage, he who guards truth with lies. An elusive giant comprised entirely of masks. A deceitful Janus with multiple faces, each of them a mask for a different emotion. Determination, doubt, peace, confidence, anxiety. A dual figure with 2 weapons and 2 forms, one fake and one real. Where Visage was the reclusive lure, the mask keeper watching over its island was both the obvious front and the hidden truth, recto and verso, welcoming visitors and guiding them to what they presumed to be the Axon. The mask keeper was itself faceless, but its theatrical armor was covered entirely with faces, and it retained the dual-wielding aspect of Visage, its 2 swords attacking with misleading but masterful technique. For Renoir, art was both a window into the soul of the artist and a mirror into the heart of the viewer. But he could see that Verso was held back by the masks he was constantly hiding behind, performing instead of embodying. Each of Verso's creations within his canvas, the Gestrels and Grandies and Esquier and François, and even in a way the mimes, were all painted with masks instead of faces. For Verso, everyone needed a mask, but Renoir knew that despite the truth in his son's belief, masks were but a tool that one could use to either obscure or illuminate. The island Renoir designed for his son's Axon consisted, aside from Visage Chamber, of 3 distinct regions, each veil dominated by one mask of emotion. A laughing mask to reveal joy, a roaring mask to project anger, and a weeping mask to conceal sadness. Verso was a liar, a player, who, like the mask keeper, wielded the mask of emotions and draped himself in grandiose theatrics to conceal the truth beneath, shielding himself with even more lies whenever he heard those around him. Behind the silly songs he was always composing lied a genuine love for music, which Verso kept obscured by its apparent obviousness. Renoir painted various creatures to occupy Visage Island, all reflecting different uses of masks. Despite not having one of their own, his boucliers hid and protected themselves behind a tranquil shoulder plate and a raging fiery face they could use to counterattack, a mask used to shield. The Moissonneuses wore a deceiving smile, colorful flowers and peaceful white dresses to distract from the 2 deadly blades in their hands, a mask used to lure. The joyful Chapelier concealed their faces with a large top hat that revealed only their gaping smile, but wore masks as their belt and as ornaments for the hats they used to attack. They also rode a giant floating face as a vehicle atop of which they flew, a mask used to strike. As for the disturbing contortionist, their upside-down face and overall unsettling, twitching, dodging movements served to hide where the real face lied, the single bloody eye within their chest, always fixed on its prey, a mask used to conceal. Much like Verso had always guarded his truth behind them, Visage shielded Renoir behind its masks. For his youngest, Alicia, his hidden star, Renoir painted the Reacher, she who grasps the sky, a figure hidden within a large straw tent, lifted on stilts and supported by 2 staffs, obsessed with growing taller to finally reach the stars. Starting from the base of a mountain, the Reacher endlessly built a gigantic wooden tower, inching ever higher towards the sky. Renoir knew that his daughter was too shy and self-conscious to see her true potential, and that her anxiety impeded her ambitions, blinding her to what she could achieve. Alicia's only displayed painting in the manor was but a small one, but that was because she had herself chosen to aim so low and not dared to pick a bigger canvas, afraid her skill wouldn't be sufficient. The Reacher was Renoir's hope for his daughter, Alicia fully realized, fully embracing her desires and stubbornly following her dreams despite her fear of heights. But the Reacher also contained a warning as to the dangers such an endeavor would bring. Drawn by the Axon's ambition, a chaotic horde dwelled within her wooden Babel, crude creatures plagued with pettiness and infighting and intent on tearing down her work. Mere orphelins raised without love, who, unable to build, could only sabotage the creations of others. Alicia was no such creature. She had been raised with love and with her father's endless support, a support that even extended to her axon. For Renoir had also painted himself within the tower, an orphelin like the others, but one who spent his time building, crafting wings for his Icarus, helping the Reacher claim her piece of sky. Ironically, Renoir had created Alicia's axon to build with wood and hide in straw, all things that would be torn to the ground by a single fire. And so, after the tragedy that befell his family and his daughter, Renoir altered his design for the Reacher, changing its form to better reflect the new reality and the dangers he'd wanted not to see. Hidden in the midst of the Reacher's mountain, near the tower, lied threats even Renoir's orphelin couldn't protect his daughter against, perils in her axon's path that she, in her endless climb, was sure to meet. Deceiving monsters, lights in the fog, who would try to lure her in to better take her down. The hooded veilleurs used their seemingly frail appearance as bait to crush their prey with a wooden boulder they kept hidden, revealing their true toughness as they absorbed others to bolster their own power. And the stalking échassiers with lights like an anglerfish, who used their figure that so closely resembled the Reacher's own to trick her into thinking they were the same, only to skewer her when her guard was down. Renoir kept the wooden structure and the straw in his redesign. The fire had shattered Alicia's confidence, and that was something he couldn't paint over, but he did change the Reacher's true form. Hidden within her projected figure now lay the real axon, a small doll-like being, immobile, paralyzed, her porcelain face cracked with a hole where her right eye would have been, a mirror of his daughter after the tragedy, and another lesson. Even now, even scarred and disabled, and more vulnerable than she'd ever been, Alicia still could reach the stars, rebuild from the ashes into something new. The guilt she felt, the fire, still held the power to burn her creations down, but just the same, she could channel and use it to reach greater heights, fly like a phoenix risen from the ashes. The tower was indeed flammable wood, but it was the hot air balloon's flames that facilitated its climb. Just like he would always support Alicia, helping her spread her wings and reach for the sky, in turn her triumph, the Reacher, supported Renoir and gave him strength. And for his love, his wife Aline, Renoir painted Sirène, she who plays with wonder, a monumental figure, graceful and mesmerizing, lost in the rhythm of her song. Her dance undisturbed as the power of her emotions warped the very world around her and, through empathic distress, overshadowed any other. Aline's art was a thing of beauty, and she was able to convoke deep reactions from her viewers, but she herself was focused solely on what she was feeling. Driven by her grief and ignoring her family's own, she'd escaped into her son's painting, abandoning everything else. Sirène's singular eye focused only on what was right in front of her and on what she wanted to see. The Axon Siren's song charmed those who came nearby, compelling them to forget everything to join in on her dance. She could make them lower their guard by making them see those they'd lost, convincing them that they could have their departed back, her emotions forced upon others, as the only one desperate to see the one she'd lost was none other than her. Renoir painted her a Colosseum, ornate with an elaborate architecture, all dedicated to her glory. He filled it with scores of floating ballet, all utterly enthralled by her song, unable to hear anything else. He decorated it with countless statues, all reaching towards her, basking in her glory. And in the center of it all stood Sirène, endlessly dancing Aline's ballet, protected and trapped by the walls dressed around her, her own grandeur separating her from the world and those around her. The fabric of her own dress restraining her movements, keeping her stuck in place, a dancer without legs. The entire Colosseum was shaped by her will, its dwellers compelled by the power of her song, her entire world free for her to use, like Aline had reshaped the canvas for her own desires. Under her spell, some ballet would even get tied to each other in unsolvable knots, eventually merging into chorale, shapeless heaps of charmed thralls. As for her bénisseurs, they served as living decoration, dispensing incense and lighting her halls. But these weren't the only devoted creatures in her Colosseum. Renoir had too fallen for Aline's charm, and his part in her life was too important to ignore, so he included himself in this allegorical depiction of his wife. In a retired corner of the Colosseum, barely reached by Sirene's song, a solitary figure tirelessly worked. Dessendre, an automaton-like being with a cracked face and 4 arms, each dedicated to a specific part of his sewing. Instead of legs, he rested upon a marble statue of Sirene, the one supporting him, the literal foundation of his life. Dessendre was the one who weaved the accent glissando, fabric-made snakes Sirene used in her dance, but most importantly, he was responsible for the creation of her dress, adorning and protecting her with the finest of textiles, all the while weighing her down in his excessive zeal. Renoir knew his own devotion could border on overwhelming, and the glimmering fabric of Sirene's dress, born of Dessardre's endless work, surrounded the Axon and even extended beyond her Colosseum, covering the island with layers and layers of gold. Still, unbothered, she used her dress as an accessory and continued her restless dance. Just like Aline had rescued him when he lost himself in the depths of his work, his love for her, Sirene, rescued Renoir from the despair he faced. He too had once lost himself in a canvas, and Aline had been the one to pull him out. It was now time for him to repay her. We do not know exactly what happened when Renoir entered Verso's canvas to save his wife, nor the order in which those events transpired, but we can postulate the following. Renoir had already tried hiding the canvas, eventually setting it in his atelier, but Aline had always ended up finding her way back to it. His resorting to enter the painting himself was likely a last resort, and I believe that his goal at the time was solely to convince Aline to come back. But what he saw when he entered was worse than what he'd imagined. He saw the city of Lumière, the fake family she'd built, and realized the truth he wanted not to face. Painting for them used to be about the process, about finding their way in the meanders of creation, but he could see that Aline now only cared about the result, what her painting could bring her. The rift between them had spread deeper than he'd realized, and he decided this had gone too far. Maybe Aline was still in control of what she was doing at that moment, the addiction having not fully set. Maybe she could have decided to renounce the canvas on her own, and only persisted due to Renoir's own insistence. Whatever the case, their clashing ideas had grown too far apart, and dialogue had failed. And so, both driven by their love, paintress and curator raised their brushes. This was not their first fight. This was their biggest fight. Two highly experienced painters, two love-bound gods of creation, engaged in a cataclysmic battle. Chroma surged and flowed, shattering the continent of their son's creation in a devastating fracture. Renoir sought to erase Aline's paintings, to eliminate the cursed souls she'd created in Lumière, but she didn't let him. Of the two, she was the more skilled, and he knew it, so he conjured help. Aline only cared when things were right in front of her, so Renoir manifested towering representations of their family, her real family, the one she abandoned, where she wouldn't be able to ignore them anymore. His first attempt at summoning the Axons failed, as evidenced by a ruined visage entangled in a glissando on the eastern side of the continent, but soon he was successful. The Hauler walked the streets of Lumière, coming into existence with Richa, Visage and Sirene to support their creator. Renoir did not succeed, however, in convincing his wife to return, so he started to erase, vanishing her creations in a mist of red flowers, a painless and merciful but equally final and murderous gommage. Aline didn't permit it. Her goal was, above all else, to protect her painted family, which she knew would be Renoir's primary target, so she did all she could to preserve them. She granted them immortality, a resistance to the gommage, and the ability to regenerate from any wounds. She gifted them powers akin to those of painters. Renoir the ability to erase, a mastery of chroma and the power to summon creations, Alicia the ability to stop time. We do not know what abilities Claire received, if she even received any, but Verso once again was left intact, save for his immortality. This newfound power turned the painted family's hair white, as was the case for painters entering canvases. They, just like everyone else within the painting, didn't understand what was going on, nor did they even know of their situation. All they could do was hide and run in the face of devastation. Aline didn't manage to save the entirety of Lumière, but still she was able to send a portion of the city into the ocean, where it would be safe from the raging apocalypse. Eventually, the fight came to a stalemate, and Aline erected a giant monolith, made of gilded and blackened obsidian, locked behind an impassable chroma barrier. Whatever their goal might have been then, each managed to seal the other inside of the monolith, Aline above and Renoir below, none of them giving in, nor giving up. At some point, either before the fracture, during the fight, or in his long imprisonment, Renoir concluded that there was only one way for this ordeal to end. He needed to expel Aline from the canvas in order to erase it entirely. This would mean destroying the last fragment of Verso's soul, but he saw it as the only way to protect the living. Renoir transformed his prison into his drafts, and there he practiced his painting. The act of creation itself meant to him that he had not given in to despair, and he kept painting portraits of his family, axons he didn't have the power to imbue with life, with creatures he didn't have the chroma to finish, but still he kept painting. In his loneliness, he kept painting. For his family, for those he loved, to remember their faces, to remember why he was doing this, he kept painting. Aline too was alone at the top of the monolith, the now crooked Eiffel Tower of Lumière in the distance, forever out of reach. Her painted family safe, but torn from her, forever alone. And so they remained, locked in place, save for faint avatars they could both project, muted versions of themselves. Verso's canvas had been shattered. The gestrels, already weakened after his departure, had been decimated, forests filled with their wooden corpses. Monoko had been killed in the chaos and reborn as an infant. The Grandis had lost their home on the verge of extinction, and Verso's drafts were buried in the deepest layers of the canvas. The painting of joy and childlike wonder now tainted by death. Lumière, the life Aline had painted to escape her grief, was now drowning in it, and fairly condemned to live a cruel life filled with sadness and melancholy. And so the status quo remained, unchangeable and unchanging. Or it would have, if not for another painter's intervention. Claire's talents had only flourished as she reached adulthood, and she'd become an extraordinary painter, one rivaling even her parents. She had always been practical and efficient. Her detachment was a trait she'd inherited from her mother, and one she wielded with great skill. But still, she was not without emotion. Her little brother had been killed, her childhood best friend murdered, her little sister maimed. Claire, like all of them, was grieving, and her answer was rage. A cold, burning rage. Immediately after the fire, she involved herself directly and personally in the war against the writers, taking real action against those responsible. Her disappointment, then, at the sad state her mother had been reduced to, was understandable. Aline had always been the strict and disciplined one, yet here she was now, crumbled by grief, willingly stuck in a fantasy that would claim her life. She had failed her responsibilities as the head of the Painters' Council, who was now forced to engage in the war without her. But in spite of her disappointment, Claire thought her mother grown enough to make her own decisions, and never opposed her choice to stay in the canvas. She knew her parents, knew how they were and how they bickered, and she knew she couldn't afford to waste time on their childishness. She would take charge, as she always had, but she also needed her father's help in the war effort, and he too was stuck in the painting, attempting to rescue his wife. Claire knew how stubborn Renoir was when it came to his family. That was likely the reason she needed him in the first place, but his need for control ensured that he would never leave Aline behind. She didn't want to get involved. Still, she had no choice but to assist him. So, shortly after her father, Clair entered the canvas, and she too started painting. The canvas was hers. She'd painted half of it with Verso. It was a world they'd shared, though one she'd outgrown. But now her mother had defiled it in her selfishness, making a mockery of their family, and her father had imposed his grand lessons upon it. Their clash had destroyed it, both of them still ignoring their real responsibilities outside. This could not stand, so Clair started painting. She couldn't simply kill Aline's creations. Their chroma would be returned to their creator, giving Aline an edge over Renoir, one she already had due to her superior skill. So Clair designed another method, one that would tip the scales in her father's favor. She painted thousands of creatures, taken from her earlier works, and scattered them within the canvas. She made sure each of them fit their environment, harmoniously taking it into themselves, each beautiful and deadly in its own way. The circumstances were after all no excuse to settle for anything short of perfection. Those creatures, the Lumierans would later name Nevrons, attacked any who stood in their way, provided they weren't created by Clair, and had the particularity of freezing the chroma of their kills within their body, preventing it from returning to Aline, thus sapping at her power over time. This process was also an act of creation, as the Nevron's victims became statues themselves, art, even through death. Even her world eaters, painted to destroy the environment, were made as part of the landscape, as tranquil as mountains, beauty in erasure. Clair's strides to keep her creations in the canvas as aesthetic as they weren't simply born of her high standards, but also out of respect and out of love. For Verso, for the world they created, to honor those memories they'd shared. And it is with that goal in mind that Clair attempted something different, taking inspiration from her father. This was not the first time she'd tried her hand at an unfamiliar style, far from it. Learning and mastering new skills was something she thrived on, but here the circumstances were what made it feel appropriate. This was the only show of grief she would allow herself. To honor her brother, Clair painted an axon. Not a giant like her father had made, that was not necessary, but a heartfelt creation nonetheless, a representation of Verso. The base would be inspired by Renoir's own interpretation, two faces surrounded by spirals, separated yet part of the whole, distractions from the mask that serves as the real core. Long arms and large dexterous pianist hands as main ways of expression and attack, wrists bound by his own chroma. A control of the fog where he could hide to protect himself, flickering masks in and out of existence to render himself totally invisible. A body of wood and marble and fabric and all the things he found along his way. Verso's creations, the gestrels for instance, were often fashioned from reused items he'd imbued with a story and personality. He was a scavenger, as Clair fittingly chose to name her new creation. This was her largest display of emotions within the canvas since her return, one so important it left an imprint in the surrounding area, a part of Clair herself, cast in ember, the Lady of Sap. But alas, it was the only one she allowed. Her creations, like herself and everything else, had to be perfect. Her Nevrons were created to kill, obedient servants with no minds of their own, and certainly no emotions. She could not allow it. She would not show weakness. Yet perfection, like her father had once told her, was but an unattainable siren leading her astray. Art, the act of creation itself, was inherently flawed, and neither she nor her paintings were exceptions to this. Her control, as immaculate as it was not absolute. Some Nevrons were left mistakenly unfinished, colorless, not yet imbued with the cruel duty of their birth. These errors, these faults, were vessels through which Clair's emotions leaked. Her ambition, her expectations, her desire to grow and to see others grow, her guilt, her fear, her sense of childlike wonder now deeply concealed in a cold exterior, and even her repressed feelings of lost emptiness. Despite her efforts, she couldn't separate the inextricable link between art and artist, between her heart and her paintings. She had realized this truth, and she despised it. So she created another monster, one to let her regain control. She painted the Noirs as creatures of death, efficient dark erasers who would expunge any who didn't fit. Their body would be a proof of her skill, the hands that allowed her to create wonder just as much as they could vanish it. Yet here too perfection eluded her, and an unfinished noir was born, a creature named Blanche. Another failure. Clair's faults highlighted once again, bearing for her a new lesson. Failure was unavoidable, yet a failure would cease to be if one turned it into an opportunity. She could utilize even her flawed creation. Clair gave Blanche a mission, to track down the other unfinished Nevrons and erase them from the canvas. A tool even discarded had its use. Verso had understood it, and Clair now did too. There were others she could use to her advantage. She dismissed them at first, but maybe even they could be made to serve her goals. Clair set her sights on Lumière. Aline had not told her painted family about their situation. They and the rest of the inhabitants of Lumière didn't know about the canvas, the real world, and the lie that was their existence. She had made them sentient, able to feel and think, and made their lives as real as those outside the painting. An irresponsible and cruel act committed in a powerful state of grief, but committed nonetheless. Those painted souls had lived their lives inside the canvas. They had shared in love, anger, and grief as the humans they were. Even the painted family had developed feelings and formed bonds in Lumière, independent from their real-life counterparts. Clair, for instance, had fallen in love and entered a relationship with another Lumièran, one of Verso's friends, a man named Simon. Aline had made her creations thrive, but those lives, like hers, had been shattered by death. The fracture had destroyed their world, an apocalypse of which they knew neither the cause nor the reason, and of which they were wholly undeserving. Their city had been destroyed, thrown in the middle of the sea while the sky broke above their heads and the ground melted beneath their feet. Clair had naught but contempt for these painted lives, her mother's obscene puppets for her deluded fantasy. Yet she had not been opposed to letting Aline stay in the canvas to numb her grief. Her life was her own and she could do with it what she saw fit. But Clair refused to play any part in that fabrication. So, when, upon entering the canvas, she laid eyes on the painted family her mother had made, when she saw herself, her own copy inside the painting, Clair was outraged. We do not know exactly what her painted version was like. Maybe Aline had indeed painted Clair in a way she judged more preferable, more fit to her standards than her real daughter. Maybe she'd been honest in her portrayal, painting Clair in all her qualities and imperfections, thus prompting her ire. Simon may also have been another cause for her wrath. Maybe he too had a real equivalent and was painted after someone Clair knew and maybe loved. Maybe he'd been entirely fabricated by Aline, a toy to play with her daughter's life. Or maybe Clair's skilled fingers favored another type of material entirely. Whatever the case, one thing was certain. Her mother had chosen to walk away. She'd given up on them, on her. She'd left her behind. And yet she'd had the gall to include her in her fantasy, to make a fake version of her, a travesty adjusted to her liking. Clair could not let this affront pass. Her parents' fight had torn the canvas apart and turned her flying manor into ruin. In lightning-quick strokes of chroma, Clair rebuilt it and altered it for its new purpose. Then she entered Lumière and captured her painted self. She could have simply erased her, made this hated portrait disappear, but that would be a waste. Clair knew she would not stay in the canvas for long. There were more pressing matters at hand in the real world, and that her Nevrons would therefore eventually all be killed. So she devised a way to solve both problems at once. For a painter to paint over someone else's creation was an incredible feat of skill, but one Clair had mastered, the only one in her family. She repainted her own alter ego, robbing her of her voice and her free will, and granting her tremendous amounts of power. She gave her the ability to paint, and gave her one single purpose: to keep painting. From the flying manor, she would paint Nevrons in Clair's sake, ensuring, even in her absence, that there would always be enough to fill the continent and to destroy Olene's creations. The mistress had named a regent. She condemned her painted copy to an endless life of captivity and creation, trapped by jailers of her own making, in a workshop that would be her prison. The deed accomplished, Clair locked the gates and left the flying manor. But even here she left a part of herself, within her creation a sliver of her heart, of the truth she kept buried. Though she did not consider it alive, the copy had borne her face. It was her reflection, imperfect as it was, and in repainting her, Clair had imbued her with her own feelings. The repainted Clair spent her life stuck in a loop of mindless painting, the art that was supposed to bring her so much joy, now a violent chore. Her creations were used to kill, and were also a means of defense. By drowning her opponents in an endless flow of deadly creatures, she was sure to remain safe, and would heal if any of their attacks connected. The only way to defeat her was to rise to her standards, a flawless defense that would prevent her healing. In other words, in achieving perfection herself, forcing her to face her own imperfection. Clair had taken charge of the Dessendre family. She'd taken the lead in the war against the writers, and she'd even found a way to hurry the end of her parents' quarrel inside the canvas. But this was all a front. She'd surrounded herself in her creations, art pieces she'd been so proud of, now turned into simple tools, violent killing machines. Her anger, her rage were what protected her family, but also herself. Her restless quest for revenge and fighting was a way to avoid facing the reality of Verso's death, all the while giving her an impression of control. Renoir had once thought that, of his 3 children, Clair resembled him the most, and in this regard she certainly did. Still, beneath this facade resided the undeniable truth. Stripped of her Nevrons, of her control, of her perfection, what was left of Clair was simply sadness and despair. Her brother was gone, and she was in pain, agonizing pain. Violence was her only way to escape it, through her creations and through her war. She raged at the world, so that she didn't rage at herself. Yet in repainting her copy and condemning her to a life of torture, that was what she'd done, unwillingly laying bare her hidden emotions on the mirror and window of art. After the fracture and the disappearances of many, such as Olene and now of their Clair, Lumière decided to send out a search and rescue team to look for survivors and explore what was left of the continent. Renoir took the lead of what would be known as Expedition Zero, desperate to find his wife and daughter, and was joined by Verso and Simon, as well as many others. They found the continent infested with Nevrons and no survivors anywhere. So they decided to go further, to investigate the strange monolith that had suddenly risen on the horizon, hoping that it would provide answers. And answers it did provide. Upon reaching the chroma barrier, they were stopped by a familiar figure, one resembling their daughter and sister and lover, but one who was not her. Clair told them everything. The truth about their painted existence, about the canvas, about the fracture, and about the fire. She'd hoped in doing so to recruit them in the fight to expel Olene from the canvas, to use her mother's creations against her like she'd done her copy. But Expedition Zero refused. Destroying the paintress would mean their doom, the erasure both of themselves and of everyone they knew and loved. She was their creator, the one who painted and sustained their lives against the one who wished their end. Their defiance was short-lived though, for Clair, in turn, unleashed her powers against them. Of the original search and rescue team, only Verso and Renoir made it back to Lumière, thanks to their immortality. The truth was too unthinkable to share, and it would only be met with skepticism if revealed in full. They therefore decided to hide the full story, only informing their comrades that the paintress was not their enemy, and that the real threat was what lied beneath her monolith. Though welcomed only with suspicion and distrust, they spoke not of the fate of the other expeditioners. From their refusal to follow her, Claire knew Lumière was sure to eventually send out more expeditions on the continent. Her Nevrons were powerful, but would undoubtedly be outmatched by a sustained assault from a constantly evolving civilization. No, she would need a designated tool, conceived with the sole purpose of snuffing out their petty resistance. A creature of carnage. She painted a tall suit of bronze plate armor, with 4 arms and no face. She draped it with a cloak stitched from the garbs of fallen expeditioners, a mockery of their futile efforts. She gave it 2 swords, straight and curved, to efficiently mow through hordes of enemies, and the ability to manipulate their blood in a devastating storm of relentless attacks that would take down any survivors. Fittingly, she made it in pair. Her duelists would be hunters, ones who stalked their prey and ambushed them when they were most vulnerable. Clean, efficient, the most powerful and deadly of her Nevrons, and the ones that would bring the most expeditions to an end. But Verso and Renoir weren't the only expeditioners to have survived Claire's onslaught at the barrier. Simon had been distraught at the sight of her, a woman who looked so much like his beloved, powerful beyond belief and knowledgeable about the fundamental truths of his world. It was a weakness Claire was sure to use. She approached Simon and convinced him that Aline was the one responsible for his love's capture, and that, in order to free her, he would have to break through the barrier and expel her from the canvas. To break through the barrier, however, would require massive amounts of chroma, the quantities of which would only be found in the hearts of the axons. Simon was strong. He was the Sword of Lumière and an extremely talented fighter, but Claire knew it wasn't nearly enough to give him a chance against an axon. She, however, could change that. She imbued him with power, giving him the ability to summon massive weapons from the sky onto his opponents. To test his skill and make sure he was ready, she made him fight one of her duelists on the shores near a forgotten quarry. Simon won the fight and triumphed of the duelist, but it was likely not as one-sided as Claire had hoped, as Simon had lost his arm in the battle. In the aftermath of the fight, she gave him even more power. The swords he summoned now possessed an ethereal glow, gold chroma pouring out of them, humming with energy. He was faster, stronger, still utterly devoted to her and to his oath to find his lost love. The time had come. All that was left was to determine Simon's target, the axon that would have to fall. Claire needed Renoir for the war, but he'd instead chosen to go after Aline in the canvas, putting them all in this absurd situation. He too had walked away, leaving her to deal with their mess. He too had painted his family within, grand and pompous lessons filled with overbearing metaphors. He'd depicted her as carrying the entire world, criticizing her for it, yet he'd been the one to force her into this position. What good was telling her she was taking on too much if he too was adding to her charge, painting his parables instead of actually helping her, wasting her time instead of being by her side? She'd unmade her mother's copy of her. There was no reason not to do the same for her father's. Simon arrived in Old Lumière and readied himself to face the Hauler. The battle was grandiose, shaking the very ground upon which the ruined city stood. Simon drowned the Hauler under an endless rain of golden swords, while the giant stood its ground, tearing the landscape apart, trying to crush its foe. But in the end it wasn't enough. Simon managed to topple the Hauler and trapped it in place, pinning its arms to the ground with radiant blades, leaving it vulnerable for the final blow. He called down a sword from the sky and drove it through the back of the axon's head. Simon stood triumphant. The giant had been felled. The heart held within was his. He'd become the most powerful creature in the canvas, his hair turned white by the sheer amount of chroma he now held, his strength rivaling even that of a painter. Simon successfully crossed the barrier, and Claire, satisfied, left the canvas. Everything could have ended in that moment. Had Simon indeed defeated Aline, the canvas would have been erased, and with it the world of denial she was trapping herself in. But, as we of course know, that is not what happened. He had diligently followed Claire, obeyed her directives, trusted her word, but now that she'd left, Simon only felt lost. She was not the woman he'd loved, despite her appearance, yet he'd been so quick to dismiss all suspicions. He'd fought heaven and earth, subdued giants for her, but he didn't know her. He didn't know her intent. She'd warped his mind, fooled him into doing her bidding, into becoming a tool for her to use. With this sudden realization soon came another. She had been the one to take his Claire away, to lock her where he could never reach, to turn her too into a pawn. There was nothing he could do. It was then that he reached the top of the monolith to confront the paintress. But Aline was not the monster he'd expected to find. She was his creator, one who only wanted to see him live and thrive, and who, just like him, wanted her family back. She offered him hope. She could help him save his Claire. She had the power to help him, but she too was trapped, locked in place by a stalemate. But Simon could free her. Claire had given him the power to. With Aline's help, he descended underneath the monolith, where she had sealed Renoir away. He was the one invoking the flowers of the Gommage, the one threatening their very existence. If Simon could only defeat him, his love would be returned, Lumière would be restored, and his world would be saved. But alas, despite his strength, despite his immortality, he was no match for the powers of the curator. Renoir dropped him at the bottom of the world, deep in the blackness of the abyss, with no possible hope of escape. An eternity of loneliness and longing, where even death would never reach. Simon was trapped, his mind breaking under Renoir's creeping influence, his last conscious thoughts the consoling certainty that one day their suffering would end, and that he and Claire would find their way back to each other, in death or in another life. He would not be the only one corroded by solitude. Aline was already spiraling before entering the canvas, and though she'd found a foothold in her painted family, the fracture had ripped them away from her, plunging her back into the void of her son's absence. Her heart still resided in the manor of old Lumière, her avatar living there with her creations the life she couldn't have, but herself remained alone at the top of the monolith, overlooking the ruins of Verso's painting. Aline's creations were many and complex, and she knew she wouldn't be able to maintain them internally against Renoir's efforts to erase them, now that Claire's paintings ensured she never got their chroma back. So she created an accent of her own, an incarnation of her feelings, her representation of herself. Not the grandiose dancer her husband saw, draped in the finest of fabrics, but a titanic faceless figure, frail and naked, its stone-like body shattered, its heart ripped out, its posture curled up in restless grieving slumber. On the monolith she painted a number, a warning to the people of Lumière. 100. The number of years she could keep them alive, preserve them against her husband's efforts. Each year, as the paintress weakened, the number would go down, and the oldest, whose age was painted on the monolith, would be erased. A countdown to Lumière's end, whose doom she could only watch from afar, perched at the top of her prison, on the other side of the world. Time slowly eating at her, as her already fragile sense of reality gradually rusted away. Renoir was trapped in the same loneliness under the golden roots of the monolith, but he did not let it consume him. He stubbornly kept painting, kept drafting, and, every year, kept erasing his wife's creations. The expeditioners from Lumière were aiming at the paintress, and Renoir used his own avatar to help them in their progress, hoping that they could expel her from the canvas, though all expeditions ended in failure. Still, he did not give up. He couldn't. For the sake of his family, for the sake of his wife, of his love, he couldn't. Eventually, the number would reach 0, and Aline wouldn't have the power to remain in the canvas. All Renoir needed to do was wait in hope that she wouldn't lose her life before then. The world outside continued its march, while the two of them remained frozen in place in the atelier of the Dessendre manor. Clair had tipped the scales, hastened the end of their quarrel, but still there remained one thing to take care of. Though time had passed and wounds had scarred, Alicia's nights were still plagued by endless nightmares, the memory of the fire still vivid, still burning, still haunting her. Unlike her mother or father or sister, she didn't have the luxury of being able to forget. Her breathing itself was stained by suffering, her vision permanently impaired, her very flesh marked by the tragedy. And through it all, she had no one to blame but herself. She had chosen to go against Aline. She had chosen to trust the writers. She had caused her brother's death. Her already shy nature had only been further inflamed. The guilt and pain had kept her confined to her room, the loss of her voice rendering any conversation impossible. Any sense of confidence or self-worth she might have had was gone. Joy had become an elusive and foolish dream. Around her in the manor, the walls, the portraits, the paintings, the musical instruments, everything reminded her of Verso. There was nothing for her outside anymore. Paris had nothing left to offer her, so she had no choice but to remain in the empty and silent halls of her home, alone, a ghost, her life reduced to a shadow of existence. Since her parents' departure inside the canvas, Alicia had been left nigh entirely by herself, with only the slimmest of company. Noko and Monoko III had been undisturbed by the harrowing circumstances, and the two dogs spent their time peacefully sleeping by the hearth, seemingly unaware of her presence, forgiving in their ignorance. Such was not the case of the other residents still left in the manor. Clair had not been merciful despite her sister's state. She still treated her the same way she treated everyone, direct and to the point, with no regards for emotions and sensitivities, cold and almost petty, harsh and bossy, a mirror of how their mother had once behaved. She didn't shy away from reminding her of what had happened every chance she got, nor to remind her of her part in causing it. Day or night, sleeping or awake, alone or with her sister, Alicia could not escape the guilt. Her life was without purpose, without light, without warmth, but not without love still. In spite of her cruel exterior, Clair still cared. She resented her, true, but she cared nonetheless, just like she both hated Verso for his damned foolishness and loved him for saving their sister's life. She cared enough, in any case, to hear Alicia's breathing across the many halls of their empty home, enough even to understand her clearly through simple groans, enough to refuse to leave her alone in the manor in a state of immeasurable mental distress. Clair was leaving. The war was still raging and she needed to ensure the painter's survival. But although she wouldn't cuddle Alicia, she couldn't leave her unsupervised at a time like this. Her sister desperately needed a distraction, and Clair had just the one. Alicia was quietly fading, slowly swallowed by a colorless, empty routine of nothing. But that ubiquitous monotony was suddenly broken. Her sister called her in their father's atelier, informed her of her departure, and gave her something to do. There was no real need for it, no true urgency to it, but it was something other than nothing. A chance for her to help, to fix things, to change. Clair told Alicia to enter the canvas and help Renoir. No doubt she could have done it herself. Had she decided to get personally involved, it is likely that Aline would be out of the painting already. But she didn't, and asked her sister instead. Alicia couldn't refuse, and her reasons to accept were many. There was, of course, the guilt she felt, for the fire, for Verso, for destroying their family. There was a sense of liability, one that came with the guilt, that she owed her sister, that she owed them all to fix her mistake, to do what Verso would in her stead. That intention was genuine. She wanted to fix things beyond the simple feeling of obligation. But beneath it all also lied a selfish reason. Legitimate, but selfish nonetheless. Within the canvas she could repaint herself. She could erase the scars, she could talk and breathe again without being in constant pain. She could live once more. Alicia buried that selfishness, but still it persisted, and eventually festered. After hiding it in a good enough spot for Claire to compliment her, Alicia entered the canvas. She was immediately betrayed by her lack of confidence. Directly upon entering, she was swallowed by the torrent of her mother's chroma. Had she managed to keep her calm, she would have been able to resist it, but she didn't. And, without even realizing it, Aline painted over her own daughter. I've no doubts that by now you've noticed what I'm doing. The acts, the order of events, the order in which I'm presenting them, all of it was intentional. All of it was for a reason. It's time to dive a little deeper. Why? Why does all of this make sense to us? Why is it so easy for us to comprehend the story of the Dessendre family? Why is it so easy for us to understand Alicia's feelings over Verso's death? These are not events we've seen, but they are events we've lived. Upon entering the canvas, Alicia is painted over by her mother's chroma and inserted within the rest of Aline's creations, with no memories prior, a new life to live, and a new name, Maëlle. Maëlle grows up in Lumière, a troubled child and an orphan, going from family to family, until eventually finding a home, someone who wouldn't throw her away, an inventor named Gustave. At age 16, way earlier than what would be reasonable, she decides to embark on an expedition, the 33rd, joining Gustave and their comrades on their mission to defeat the paintress and free the world from the cycle of the gommage. But on her expedition, Maëlle relives her own story, the story of the canvas, and the story of its artists, the Dessendre family itself. Alicia, Maëlle, leaves the comfort and safety of Lumière, a city of her mother's creation shielded by a protective dome. But her first steps, her first breaths taken into the world, into the continent, come with pain, blood and tears. She exits the maternal womb that no longer fitted her to live a life where joy and excitement, but also hardships and suffering, are sure to find her. Act 1. After the landing at the beach, she finds herself home, inside the manor, under the protective watch of the curator, her father, who gives her the tools she needs to face the world outside, and also looks after her during her adventure. She, and we with her, discovers the fun of childhood. After making our way through the flying waters, we explore the ancient sanctuary to find the gestural village and its wacky residents. We play with them like Verso and Claire once did, indulging in their goofy but endearing antics. We meet Esquier and François and go on an adventure to find Esquier's rocks. But on our journey we're surprised by the sudden horror of the Lampmaster, which we are unable to properly defeat. And there the fun ends with the abruptness of death. A life stolen by a conflict we know nothing of and understand nothing about. The death of a mentor, of a friend, of a brother. Gustave. Verso. Anger, grief, violence, blood. Act 2 begins. We see the newer additions to the canvas. The devastation of Claire's duelist. The home of Verso's Grandis ruined by the fracture. Aline's old Lumière, the city she created, and her painted family. Verso, Renoir, Alicia, the heart of the paintress that resides within. We see Renoir's accents, visage, sirène. We triumph of these effigies of love and breach the barrier to the monolith. Inside we find our journey yet again. We retrace our tainted steps, meadows, waters, sanctuary, cliffs, battlefield, heart, and finally Lumière. and through our own steps, we see the life of Aline in quick snippets, the decline of her and Renoir's couple. We witness firsthand how their goals and their art have diverged, the curator moved by the process, the paintress driven by the product. We see the length that rift has led them to. We see Renoir erase his wife's creation, her flawed portrait of him, in a blast of red petals. And finally we face Aline, trapped by the stalemate, mind eroded by time and grief, 67 years spent in isolation. She sees Maël's face, Alicia's face, and is immediately brought back to the fire, to the tragedy, to her daughter's scars and the blame she puts on her. She sees her painted verso and, in her desperation, delusion and denial, convinces herself that he is her son and not her creation. As for us, Maël, Alicia, she only somewhat recognizes us, and so do we her. But both our understandings of what is currently happening are blurred, lost in dream. Was the fire real? Is Verso really dead? Is Maël Alicia, or is she something else? Who is the curator? Did the paintress make us, or did he? Ironically enough, in Maël's case, the answer to that question is both. And, after we defeat Aline, Alicia, painted, tears the status quo apart with a simple letter, bringing us and Maël exactly where we were before Expedition 33, where this story began and where it ended. The Epilogue. Alicia, the little shadow, her nightmares, her scars, her pain, her phantom existence in the real world, her sister calling her in the atelier, the manor, Verso's absence, Claire's aggressive attention, her mother stuck in the painting, the mission to help her father, entering the canvas. For that is indeed exactly where we left off. Alicia enters the canvas and, without even realizing it, Aline paints over her own daughter. The story catches itself, the past meets the present. Finally, Act 3 can begin, and things can change. Or not. Before we proceed forward, we need to ask ourselves one question, one that, despite everything, we still haven't fully touched upon. Through their art and their actions within Verso's canvas and without, we've been able to study and paint a portrait of Claire, Aline and Renoir, and though we've mentioned her several times, that question still remains. The mystery of the one whose art we do not see, whose creations, out of view, cannot be analyzed. Who is Alicia Dessendre? And in turn, who is Maël? From her first appearance and onward, the character is introduced to us by opposition. She is the first enemy we fight in the game, and, depending on our choices, also the last. Unlike the rest of her family, her art isn't used to flesh out her character. Instead, she is built through contrast. While her family paints, creates, she reads and writes alone. While everyone is partying, drinking and talking before the departure of Expedition 33, she stands alone at the docks, looking at the horizon. Maël, like Alicia, is a loner. Inside or outside the canvas, she doesn't fit in with her peers. Even within the expedition, where she arguably felt more camaraderie than ever in her life, she's still half the age of the other members. And even in their moments of fun, she's still haunted by visions and nightmares only she can see. There always seems to be a gap separating her from the others, one that, despite her efforts, she cannot close. Maël had always felt like her life belonged somewhere outside Lumière, and while this is true to an extent due to her own nature, one cannot help but question if there is really anywhere she belongs. In Lumière, she's uncontented by her life, longing for something more. On the continent, during the expedition, she only finds violence and death and loses the only family she had in Gustave. But while Verso tries to take on that role for her, it is one he is ultimately unable to truly fill. Due to her unknown identity as a paintress, Maël perceives chroma differently from anyone else and possesses powers even she doesn't understand. After the expedition triumphs of the painted Renoir and her abilities are further awakened, she seems almost dazed, uncertainty replacing her stubborn determination to get revenge for Gustave. and once they defeat the paintress, and as she is banished, Aline calls her Alicia by name, finally recognizing her daughter, Maëlle is more lost than ever. While everyone, save for Verso, is celebrating their victory, she stands silent, unable to join in and feel their joy. Maëlle's life was plagued by loneliness, and it is in loneliness that it reaches its end. As Renoir is freed from the monolith, he erases the inhabitants of Lumière. Maëlle, as we know her, dies, and Alicia rises. In regaining her memories and abilities, a part of her was lost. Gone is the confused, melancholic, anxious Maëlle. In her stead stands a confident, powerful, yet equally immature Alicia. But that Alicia, that new Maëlle, is still vastly different from the one who entered the canvas. True, she has lived a whole new life in Lumière, but I do not believe that is the reason as to why. In the real world, Alicia is weak. She is broken, wounded, choked by guilt. The full extent of her vulnerability has been thrust in her face, an indelible scar that will never fade. She is, quite literally, voiceless. But inside the canvas, she is a paintress, wielder of godlike abilities. She can alter reality itself, reshape it to her liking, erase even the grief that plagued her so. Within the painting, she can undo death. That kind of absolute power corrupts, and when given to one who had never before felt control or agency in her life, it corrupts absolutely. Suddenly, her life in Lumière is everything she'd always wanted, regardless of how badly she wanted to leave before the expedition. Her rage, her thirst for adventure, and hunger for a fight are no more, forgotten as though they never even existed, replaced by striving for a perfect, peaceful life. These changes aren't questioned, not by anyone, eclipsed by the splendor of her abilities. Ironically, despite her newfound power, and though she doesn't even realize it, she's still just as lonely as ever. I questioned earlier whether there was anywhere Maëlle really belonged, and while one answer to that would be yes, her real life outside the canvas with the rest of her family, it doesn't fully satisfy me. We are shown time and time again that even in the real world, Alicia does not fit in. A writer in a line of painters, the black sheep of her family who sat alone in her room while her siblings played together, a voiceless husk responsible for all their woes. But even that answer I find superficial, for we are also shown that she was raised with love, both as Maëlle and as Alicia, that she has her place, her home, in Lumière and in her family. Gustave, Verso, Renoir, they accept her as she is and only want the best for her. So, what? The truth is, I was being disingenuous, for the flaw here lies not with these answers, but within the question itself. Rather than asking if there is nowhere she belongs, we should be asking, why? The reason for this lack of belonging lies deep in the heart of her character. Alicia was established through opposition, and that opposition is a constant, found everywhere throughout the story. She defies others' expectations and what they want for her. She joins the expedition despite Gustave's wishes. She doesn't paint despite who her family is, and even defies her mother's ironclad authority despite being ultimately in the wrong. She breaks the rules, she takes down all shields, she pierces through the barrier of the monolith, she fractures the status quo and undoes even the almighty gommage. And when her father is freed, she continues on and opposes him too, this time even breaking the fundamental rules of the game itself by taking him down during his own turn. Opposition and defiance aren't intrinsically bad things. Testing and pushing against boundaries is an essential part of growing up. Maëlle is only 16, and though that is likely not the case for Alicia, I don't believe her to be that much older. Not enough, in any case, for it to make a real difference. But it is when taken to its extreme that systematic opposition becomes dangerous, because it deprives us of our ability to learn, a risk that Alicia fell prey to completely. Despite being where she travels the most across the continent, and despite it bearing her name, Act 3 is also, quite paradoxically, where Alicia changes the least. With the ability to fly, everything becomes reachable, and thus none of it truly matters, regardless of its own story. She confronts her painted self, she defeats Clair's Noir in the dark shores and Scavenger in the falling leaves, she takes down Sprung, fells Oskio and unpaints the workshop's lampmaster, she triumphs of the endless tower, she sets the painted Clair free and lays Simon to rest, but none of that is of any consequence to her, none of it changes her. Because, in her stubborn opposition, she refuses to learn. This fatal flaw is best exemplified by Alicia's encounter with the Reacher. Renoir designed the axons as lessons, obstacles to be overcome, and whose defeat would allow his loved ones to conquer their weaknesses and to grow as individuals. And each of them did. Although painted, Verso defeats Visage and stops hiding the truth of his passion before eventually using his mask to convey his thoughts and desires honestly instead of concealing them beneath layers of charmful lies. Aline triumphs of Sirene and gives up on her world of control to see beyond her immediate surroundings, finally choosing to make peace with her husband even if it meant leaving the canvas for good. Even Claire, despite herself and her disdain for it, learns the lesson of the Hauler by relying on someone else to defeat it instead of carrying its burden herself, leading her to, effectively, also ask her sister for help. Alicia is the only one who doesn't. The Reacher was designed for her to face her fear of heights, to embrace her ambition and take her place at the top, but she didn't. She climbed the wooden tower, reached the top of the mountain, and let the axon go to instead erase the painted Alicia. And in so doing, she made a choice. She will not become this free being reaching for the stars. She will remain a colorless, voiceless husk, defined only by the fire and her grief over her dead brother. By allowing the Reacher to claim her piece of sky, she refused to claim her own. She declined the wings her father's orphelin built for her, denied his wish to see her fly. Despite the scale of her ascension, it didn't teach her anything. Or rather, she refused the lesson it offered. The Reacher symbolized hope. Hope for her to grow beyond the tragedy and to thrive despite her scars. That she understood. But still she let go of that hope. She couldn't share that hope, for she'd already given up on it. And that is the root of everything. Depression is a void that obscures all, that overshades everything with the lens of despair and conceals any possibility of ever escaping it. She is but a victim of circumstances, just like everyone else. Despite herself, despite what she believes, and despite what she says, Alicia has already given up. Her anxiety and insecurities had already made her give up on finding her place within her family, like her perceived lack of talent made her give up on painting, and had led her to mistakenly place all her faith in the writers who she wrongly believed she could trust. After the fire, guilt ate up at her, grief erected walls she couldn't see past. She gave up on her own future, unable to see a life for herself without pain and despair. She gave up on the possibility of ever finding joy again, of ever having fun or smiling again despite her scars. She gave up on grief and on the very idea of living without being constantly reminded that her brother died because of her. Alicia doesn't belong because she's given up on belonging. She can't accept the Reacher's lesson because she's given up on hope. And she can't evolve from her journey because she's given up on change. After all, if her own future is without worth, why grow up at all? Why bother healing or grieving or moving on when she can stay here within the canvas, unchanging, forever? In abandoning hope, Alicia has doomed herself, for those who do not learn from others and from their mistakes are bound to repeat them. I am getting ahead of myself here. For despite her being arguably the main character of the story, Alicia, or Maëlle, isn't the one through which we experience it. Even when all hope was lost, when she was bound to certain death, there remained one to love her, to save her from her fate, even at the expense of his own. Make no mistake, the character we play isn't Maëlle, it's Verso. The version of her son Aline painted within his canvas was, save for his created state and gifted immortality, a faithful copy built from her memories, one that she probably didn't have the heart to alter in any way. It is therefore very likely that, despite them being different entities, this painted Verso's thoughts and feelings aligned with those of his real counterpart, a point that the story itself would help corroborate. After the failure of Expedition Zero and their return to Lumière, Verso and Renoir embarked on a second search and rescue mission with their newfound knowledge that the paintress wasn't their enemy, but their savior. Among this second expedition was Julie, a woman Verso had feelings for that, in all likelihood, were reciprocated. We do not know whether Julie was painted after someone the real Verso knew, but as was the case for Simon with Claire, this matters little. As unexplained sole survivors of Expedition Zero, Verso and Renoir had been met with suspicion upon their return, an unspoken mistrust that slowly festered. At some point in their expedition, Verso was mortally wounded by a Nevron attack. However, after the encounter, due to his regenerative abilities, he had not only survived but also made a near-complete recovery. Julie had seen it happen, and she couldn't accept any of his attempts to deny it. Verso had draped himself in lies, so much so that even his truth seemed untrustworthy, and, although unwarranted, suspicions of betrayal had started to grow. Along with the rest of the search and rescue expedition, Julie confronted Verso, then captured him and interrogated him. Verso couldn't tell her the truth, so he made a choice, one that tore him apart. Unlike his father, he didn't believe Julie was Claire's creation, but that didn't change anything. She was simply doing what she thought was right, and so was he. After what happened to their Claire, they couldn't take any risks. The painted family, what remained of it, massacred the rest of the search and rescue expedition. The sole survivor, Julie, took up arms against Verso in an attempt to avenge their fallen brethren, and Verso, reluctantly, cut her down. Despite his regret, his anguish and sorrow, he remained convinced he was acting for the greater good, that all he did was to save his people and to protect his family, and that once his mother was freed from the monolith, all would be fixed, and Julie would be brought back. Verso's goal was to protect his loved ones. That never changed, yet his view on how to do it evolved with time. The many happenings of the 66 years that followed are all blurred. Truth is, we do not know what happened to Verso between the second search and rescue and Expedition 33, but we do have some clues. From Expedition 58's journal, we know that Verso and Renoir attempted for years to subdue the Axons in order to breach the barrier to the monolith, but failed. Verso was working with that expedition, but Renoir notably wasn't. Expedition 58 didn't manage to advance further than the Horless corpse in Eau de Lumière, but still reached dangerously close to the painted Dessendre manor before being slain by Renoir. Their significant progress seemed enough to cause worry for the side of the paintress, however. 2 years later, Expedition 56 was directly attacked by Renoir and possibly Alicia upon their landing on the continent, the first recorded instance of such an onslaught. The painted family had given up on allying themselves with Lumierans, choosing to kill them themselves before Claire's Nevrons did, so that their chroma would be returned to the paintress instead of being sealed away. What remained of Expedition 56 managed to bite back, even capturing Alicia to interrogate and kill her in retaliation, but very obviously they were stopped by Renoir and maybe even Verso. It is likely since that event, if not even before, that Alicia took a step back from the dealings of her father and brother, only involving herself again once her real equivalent entered the canvas and embarked on her own expedition. We can easily conclude that by Monolith Year 58, Verso had already stopped working with his father against the expeditioners and the curator. The actual catalyst for this change is still unknown, but I do have a theory. Verso tells Maël that he only met the real Claire 3 times. The first time, as we've established, was when Expedition Zero reached the monolith and Claire told them the truth. But it is the second time we need to take a look at. Verso gives us no detail other than that she tried to recruit him, but he noticeably doesn't say that the encounter turned violent like their first meeting did. Given his wording, it's very likely that he didn't accept her offer, but their discussion may have changed his mind on certain things. In the end, the only certainty we have is that Verso grew disillusioned and that he and Renoir had a fallout that ended in violence, with both wounding the other's face and both choosing to retain those scars. Verso had realized that if his father won and his mother remained in the canvas, it would eventually kill her. And no promise of a perfect life would erase the idea that his mother was going to die because of her grief for him. In his mind, the destruction of the Dessendre family was his fault, as would be his mother's death were she allowed to succeed. For one whose only goal was to protect his loved ones, that thought was intolerable. So Verso made the choice to betray his own family, to ally with the curator to defeat Aline in order to save her as well as her real family when he didn't even know. Despite his choices, he still saw the inhabitants of the painting as the living beings they were, and still believed that they had a right to exist, but did he feel the same way about himself? One could easily imagine that Verso had started to see himself not as truly living, but as a figment, an imperfect memory, the fading shade born of a grieving mother who refused to let go. To him, the Dessendre family were strangers. His father wasn't the curator, but Renoir, the former commander of Expedition Zero. His sister wasn't the one who entered the canvas on Monolith Year 49. She was the black and white Alicia, the one who wore a mask. But his mother, the paintress, was Aline. And that was enough. It didn't ease the pain or the guilt, but it was enough. Unlike his father, Verso wasn't painted to put the blame for everything on Alicia. And so, when Claire asked him to look after her sister, to keep her safe while she grew up in Lumière, he did. Maëlle wasn't his sister, and he wasn't her brother, but he cared all the same. Though she didn't remember it, she was who he, or at least some version of him, had given his life to save. As promised, he occasionally snuck back into Lumière to make sure she was safe, and rescued and took her to the manor when his father massacred her expedition on the Dark Shores. However, during their first real meeting, Verso is put in a very uncomfortable position. Not only does he know a fundamental truth Maëlle doesn't, but the girl is grieving. She's grieving a brother, one that isn't him, one that he could never be. In Maëlle's grief for Gustave, he sees Alicia's grief for her Verso, and he knows that, here too, he can never replace what she lost, no matter how hard he tries. Especially since he was the one who chose to let Gustave die. So, Verso does what he does best, the only thing his long life of solitude and betrayals has taught him. He lies. He hides his involvement in Gustave's death. He hides that Renoir is his father. He hides the fact that he knows the truth about everything. He drapes himself in mystery to protect himself from the consequences of his actions and from the toll they have on him, but despite everything, slivers of truth still slip through. His goofy side, his care, his love, everything the real Verso imbued within his canvas, his friendship with Esquier, Monoko and the Gestrels, even the very fact that he's keeping so many secrets is really no secret at all. He is the reflection of the axon built in his image, he who guards truth with lies. His masks are everywhere, hidden in plain sight, but still nonetheless concealing the reality of his thoughts. How then? How to untangle this mesh of lies and half-truths to understand what lies beneath? The answers reside, once again, within the Reacher, with Alicia. To say that Verso's love for his sister, real or painted for both, is central to his character would be an understatement. His real equivalent gave his life to save Alicia from the fire, and he himself was ready to do the same. Upon arriving at the monolith, Expedition 33 encounters Aline, whose mind and perception of reality have been blurred with time. At the mere sight of Maëlle, she reacts on instinct, with the only image that comes to her mind, her daughter's face on fire. I don't believe it to be a fully conscious act, but Verso's reaction undoubtedly is. Without hesitation, he pulls his sister to him, forcing the flames to consume him too, sacrificing himself once again. The image of her son in the brazier is one Aline is unable to bear, and so she stops the fire before retreating away. Among all his lies, Verso's love is the one truth that cannot be questioned. The first time we actually see Verso talking to his sister is when she comes to him after Expedition 33 defeats the second Axon. His words for Alicia are nothing if not soft and filled with care. He tells her she doesn't need to wear the mask their mother painted for her. He calls her beautiful even with her scars. He embraces her without a second thought, despite them being on opposite sides. But still, all of this remains contradicted by his own actions. He tells her she doesn't need to wear a mask, but refuses to remove his own, to tell the rest of the expedition what his real goal and motive is. He takes the letter she gives him, Une vie à rêver, but he refuses to pass it to its true recipient, Maëlle, instead dropping it into the sea after having read it. And, as Renoir points out, he embraces Alicia yet condemns her to die. He is about to expel Aline from the canvas, leaving the curator free rein to erase it and everyone within, her included. Yet this does not reflect in his behavior. He is determined, not conflicted, yet he cannot face what he is about to do. Enter the Reacher. Verso reluctantly leads Maëlle up the tower of her axon to confront Alicia. He knows how she must feel, expects her to resent him, but the reality of it hits him in the face regardless. When he presents her letter back to her, Alicia drops it, barely sparing him a glance. He chose not to deliver it, chose to keep the truth for himself, chose to ignore her wants and choices for his own desperate desire to end, and he now has to live through the consequences. Alicia asks Maëlle to unpaint her, and Maëlle obliges. Verso watches his sister vanish in a gust of red petals without having been able to talk to her or to say his goodbyes. He collapses, and Maëlle, almost disdainful, watches from above, unmoving, unmoved. This reaction from Verso is understandable, but it is conceited. This outcome bore the same results his own actions would have brought about. Had the canvas indeed been destroyed, Alicia would have been erased in the exact same way. But still, he feels angry, at Maëlle, at Alicia even. The answer as to why is simple. In fact, it is Verso who says it himself in the end. They are all hypocrites, doing the same things to each other. That is why he is resentful towards Maëlle, despite her causing the very thing he sought. That is why Maëlle grants Alicia's wish to be erased, but denies Verso's. Why she shows compassion to her painted copy, but none towards herself. That is why Verso tells Maëlle and Alicia that their lives have worth, but doesn't think the same of his. He may tell Renoir that the Dessendre aren't his family, but that doesn't change the feelings he too shares. Maëlle doesn't evolve during Act 3. She isn't changed by what she witnesses. But Verso certainly is. He sees how the painters treated his world, how they treat his will and that of the painted. He sees the pain everyone he loves went through, this suffering born of only one cause, or at least what he perceives as the only cause, himself, his own death and his family's inability to move on from it. He experiences the joy painted in the canvas for himself and comes to understand the original Verso better, both in his hope and dreams and in his suffering and fears, the excitement of new beginnings and the agony of eternity. I think it's about time we discuss the end of this story. Maëlle, Verso and the rest of Expedition 33 return to Lumière to force Renoir out of the canvas. They confront him, Maëlle draws her weapon first, and Renoir paints their arena, a broken, fractured land of ruins and canvases over a floor of crimson flowers. He summons the Axons to help him in his fight, gaining an edge over his daughter, until the worst-case scenario, both for himself and for Verso, occurs. Color vanishes and chroma swirls as Aline makes her return. Without a word, she summons her Titan and joins in the fight. The paintress against Sirène, grief against wonder, two visions of Aline, two possibilities, two paths clash. Renoir's fear only strengthens him, as he knows the effort might cost Aline her life. He summons the Dessendre canvas, drawing power from his family one last time. Maëlle only smiles, the fight now evened, victory now within her reach. Verso, though, is plunged into despair. He joined the fight against Renoir to save the canvas because he thought it hidden, thought it impossible for his mother to return. I think he believed that after his victory he could have convinced Maëlle to leave of her own accord, that there might be a future where both the Dessendre and the canvas survive. But all that hope was shattered by the arrival of the paintress. The fight continues. Renoir unleashes his power, Visage's masks, Sirène's dress, Reacher's wings, Horler's stories, but it's not enough. Maëlle breaks the rules once more and takes him down. As Sirène collapses, Renoir recalls how he too had once been trapped in a painted world, how it was Aline who had rescued him, brought him back to reality. He extends a hand to the paintress, one simple, desperate gesture, the only one he can manage in his weakened, coughing state, a gesture of pure love as he reminds her of the time they'd spent together, of the hundreds of worlds they'd created. The words echo and resonate, and Aline reaches back, making her choice at last. Love triumphs over grief, the faceless giant dissolves, and the paintress finally moves on. Renoir's fight, though, is not over. He cannot let his daughter suffer the same fate he and Aline almost did, stuck in a fantasy world. But his strengths are drained, Maëlle grown too much for him to forcefully control. He cannot convince her, her mind is set. She will stay. A little longer, she says, but he knows it's a lie, one made to sweeten the bitter truth. His daughter will die here. Rather than despair, however, Renoir chooses hope. He chooses to believe her, however wishful that desire. He embraces her one last time, reaffirms his love, and leaves the canvas. This could have been the end of things. But even though the sight of her mother in the real world, sickly from her prolonged stay in the canvas, couldn't change Maëlle's mind, it touched Verso's heart. He takes one last look at Expedition 33, and, with a word of apology, jumps through the portal. The plane where Verso lands is one difficult to describe. One might call it the core, the true soul of the canvas, a near-sacred realm, one reserved to the painters that no painted creation may enter lest they be erased, reverted into chroma. Yet still Verso lives. When he starts fading, his shape is maintained by Aline's white chroma petals, the only reason he is able to survive, ironically, his own loathed immortal nature, his mother's gift. He walks, and, on the floor, sitting perched over a canvas that is way too large for him, he finds a faceless child, forever painting, forever cursed to sustain the world he created. Verso Dessendre, the last fragment of his soul. As Maëlle too enters the Forbidden Realm, Verso confronts her with the truth of what he feels and the truth she herself tried to conceal. Out of everyone, he was the aptest to identify her words for the lies they were, and for that very reason, he could also tell that her father saw right through her mask. He too knows that he will not be able to convince her to leave, that her life is worth more than his childhood painting. Maëlle had once argued that her brother would never have wanted his canvas gone, and while I believe this is true to an extent, I have absolutely no doubts that Verso would have sacrificed it in a heartbeat if it meant saving her. But that reasoning Maëlle doesn't see anymore. She's been seduced by her godly abilities within, by the perceived freedom they gave her, by their false sense of power and agency. She's given up on her real life, the very same life her brother died to protect. Earlier I said that the painted Verso was identical to his real counterpart, and to me this is what proves it. In every world, in every version of himself, Verso would always sacrifice everything to save Alicia. Like he did with the fire, like he did on the monolith, like he is ready to do here once more. Verso reaches to the tired boy, a reflection of his own feelings, and tells him to stop painting. As the soul fragment reaches back, Maëlle draws her blade and slashes the air before the two can make contact, coercing the child back to his labor and ending all possibilities of discussion and compromise. This can only end two ways. Maëlle wants the canvas maintained, even at the cost of her life, and wants to keep living in her fantasy, even if it kills her and dooms her brother to a life of despair. Verso wants his sister safe, even at the cost of his life and that of the canvas, and wants his own accursed existence to end at last, even if it kills everyone and dooms his sister to a life of sadness. This false dichotomy is all that remains. A confrontation is inevitable, and Verso too summons his weapons. The decision as to the duel's victor falls on us. Both of them are righteous, in the same way both of them are selfish. A life to love or a life to paint. We get to choose. There is no good ending to this story. There is, however, a bad ending. If we choose to fight as Maëlle, Verso is defeated and begs Alicia to stop the boy from painting. Maël denies the very notion, and the soul fragment returns to his work for good as Verso collapses on the floor, slowly fading to white petals. But even as she approaches, he knows Maël will not allow his end. He implores her to unpaint him, his voice cracking under the existential terror of his torment continuing without end. His desperation reaches its peak, and he tells her he doesn't want this life, but Maël simply asks him to stop saying it. As the boy too continues a life he doesn't want, Maël focuses only on her own desire, her own want to live a lifetime together with Verso. She calls him her brother, and though he is not, it doesn't matter to her anymore. She's made her choice, and nothing can change it. Verso's energy wanes, and he can only uselessly ask the boy to help him, before finally disappearing. Now left alone, Maël decides on a compromise, or at least on what she unilaterally considers a compromise. She will bring him back, no matter his wishes, but she will let him grow old, hoping that his sorrow would somehow disappear. Epilogue. We are back in Lumière, the exact same ruined Lumière we discovered at the start of the game. The Lumierans, formerly erased by Renoir, have returned, and they are gathering at the Opera House for a concert. Esquier and Monaco are here to welcome them, and Maël too walks in with a child to join her friends. Lune and Ciel, who I haven't mentioned at all until now, but let's ignore that, are also here, as well as Pierre, Ciel's formerly deceased husband. Maël sits down next to them and sees a very much alive Gustave joining in, along with his formerly Gommage lover, Sophie. All of them happily sit together, ready to watch the performance. The lights go out, and the colors vanish. The stage is lit, and a piano player approaches his instrument. Verso, an older Verso, again wearing his dark suit, is welcomed by a round of applause, then sits in silence. But something is wrong. His breath catches, his hands freeze. He cannot will himself to play. Maël looks at him expectantly, as he looks at the crowd, at everyone in turn, before his eyes land on her. What he sees is a vision of horror. His sister, smiling an empty smile, looking at him with emotionless eyes, her face eaten up by chroma as she is willingly corroded. She is dying, and he can do nothing but watch. Verso steals his resolve, gives up on his fight, and starts playing. Upon first watch, the twisted nature of this supposedly happy ending is plainly obvious. Verso is doomed to live a life he doesn't want, and Maël is slowly dying inside the canvas. But the true extent of its horror is only further revealed the closer we look. First of all, concerning Verso. His passion was piano indeed, and he does get to play, but there is no passion in his expression. It is obvious he takes no joy in performing. He isn't simply alive despite his wishes, he is being paraded by Maël, displayed in view of everyone like some circus attraction. He is back in his dark suit, the very same one his real equivalent died in, the same one Aline forced the painted Renoir to wear. His existence is not his own anymore, only that of the substitute he always feared he was. I have seen theories about the identity of the child whom Maël enters the opera house with. Some have said this could be Verso and Lune's son, or maybe even a younger version of Verso, painted by Maël, while others, me included, simply believe him to be Guillaume, one of Gustave's apprentices. It is very much impossible for us to ascertain this with any semblance of certitude, and given it doesn't change the feelings of the characters as we see them in this ending, I will not develop on that specific point further. But while on the topic of Verso's audience, something is definitely off. If we look at the restored Lumierans, we can only notice that all of them are the same. This is unlike what we saw during the Gommage ceremony in the prologue. Their colors have gone. Even Maël, Lune and Ciel are donning the exact same black and white outfit. The only exceptions are Sophie and Gustave, respectively dressed in red and blue in their Gommage outfit. Come to think of it, if Sophie was brought back from her Gommage, what about everyone else? What about the other people who were erased at the same time as her or in the previous years? Maël is less skilled than her mother, it's true, but her power should be nigh infinite at this point, and her control over the canvas absolute, her ability to bring them back already proven with Lune and Ciel. And what about Gustave? He didn't lose his life during the Gommage, but was killed by Renoir during his expedition. The same goes for Pierre, Ciel's husband, who died at sea in an accident and wasn't Gommaged either. Why were they brought back? Unless maybe Maëlle didn't restrict herself to those who were raised by her father, but in that case, what about the other members of Expedition 33 who were slaughtered at the beach? What about Luné's parents, and what about Ciel's stillborn daughter? Why is Pierre back while she isn't? Why is Noko not present while he should be? And also, what about Lumière? The city is still in ruins, left exactly as it was after the fracture. Why didn't Maëlle restore it while she clearly could have? The answer to these questions is, unfortunately, very simple. Maëlle brought the status quo back to the start, or at least back to her own perception of it, before anything happened with only those who matter to her. Although, as I said earlier, she, the one doing this, isn't exactly Maëlle. For this status quo this new paintress is imposing on everyone wasn't one where Maëlle, the real Maëlle, was even happy. She'd always longed for more, but now, transformed and imbued with absolute power, the only thing she reflects is an unchanging reality, her denial of growth now forced on everyone. But one can only ask what would happen if, in this unchanging reality, something were to change. Verso was allowed to grow old, but what would happen in the case of his death? The ideal outcome would be that Maëlle would just allow it, but given that she created this entire fantasy around his survival, I simply can't imagine it. But the same goes for the others too. What if another accident happens, claiming the life of someone she holds dear? Is she simply going to keep rewriting reality until everything is perfect? In fact, is she rewriting reality even now, during Verso's performance, compelling him to play despite his own desires? All in all, this ending is simply terrifying at an existential level. A dystopia posing as paradise that isn't cruel only to Verso, but to everyone who's basically subjugated to Maëlle's absolute rule. Their universe will end when she does. And, unlike our world, the world of the canvas is finite. Its boundaries are known, there is a limit to what can be discovered and studied. But most important of all, if this pseudo-utopia is, as I think it is, a world without death, where any hardship will just be painted away by what is basically a goddess, then that existence isn't simply cruel, it's beyond torture. In such a world, there is no point in doing anything. Death is unfair, it is tragic, but it is needed. Like all things, life must come to an end at some point, such is the natural order. Grief is painful, excruciatingly so, but it is also a chance to grow. The gommage was unfair, there is no denying that, and those erased were wholly undeserving, but such is the case for any disaster. Unfair or not, it did happen, and it did have consequences. It is Sophie's death that drove Gustave to do what he did. Gustave's death was a sacrifice. He gave it a purpose and a meaning, and in grieving him, those who cared about him were able to evolve. His memory persisted in the hearts of his loved ones. Pierre's death first drove Ciel to the pits of despair, but she was given a second chance. She kept living, she grieved and grew, and in turn allowed others to grow as well. To undo Pierre's death would undoubtedly undo that growth too. And of course, at the core of everything lies Verso's death. A tragedy as unfair as the gommage, as sudden as an accident at sea, but a sacrifice as meaningful as that of Gustave. In desperately trying to deny and erase it, both Aline and Alicia only wound up inflicting even more pain all around them and defacing everything they held dear. For Aline, her relationship with her husband, her love for her family, and her son's cherished painting. For Alicia, her sense of wonder, the people of the canvas, and even Verso himself, both his painted version and the fragment of his soul. A world without death, without pain, is a world without art. In her fantasy, Maëlle is unable to create, to change anything, while Verso, on the other hand, is the one playing the piano. That ending, fortunately, is not the only one this story can have. If we choose to fight as Verso, Maëlle is defeated and collapses, tears welling up. Verso catches her before she can reach the ground, holding her in a soothing embrace as she starts to fade. Realization sets in, and Alicia, crying and scared, begs him not to leave her again. In her mind, she's back to the fire, to her brother's sacrifice, to her life emptied of joy. But Verso comforts her. Things are going to be okay. This is not death, this is not the end. She will keep living, she will be able to paint, to create. Her life can be whatever she makes of it, and if she doesn't give up, it will never be one she doesn't want. But that alone isn't enough. As golden petals fly, Alicia's state becomes one of panic. She's shaking, her breath coming in quick, short bursts. This may not be death, but it is a death of sorts. So Verso utters the only words that come to his mind, the only words that could have reassured her, the last words she ever heard from her brother in this world and the other. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay. Her breathing slowly calms, and as she closes her eyes in her brother's embrace, Alicia vanishes from the painting. The deed is done. With tears in his eyes, Verso watches the petals flow away. He is left alone, with no other choice than to face the consequences of what he wrought. Standing before him in the forbidden heart of the canvas are his two best friends, Esquier and Monoko, who even here choose to live their final moments to support him. Crying, Verso hugs his friends and tells them that he will miss them, as the two are erased, reverted to chroma. Behind them stands Ciel, her expression empty of rancor, but her eyes full of disappointment. She steps forward even as she fades, and Verso reaches out to her, hoping for understanding. Ciel considers it and reaches back. She knows why he's doing this and doesn't resent him for it, but she cannot support him and steps away before their hands make contact, disappearing in a mist of red petals. When Verso looks back up, he can see Lune through the portal, back in Lumière. She will not step in or shorten her life for his sake. Her gaze is filled with betrayal and rage and bitterness. The bright future she and every expedition before her worked and fought and died for now ripped away at the very last moment. If he wants comfort, she will give him none. Lune simply sits without taking her eyes off of him, giving up on her fight, but not on her spite. Verso approaches the young boy and reassures him. His toil is over. The boy nods, gets up and takes his hand. The two Versos walk away together, before, in turn, finally disappearing. Epilogue. We are back in the real world, just outside the Dessendre manor. A solitary grave in the gardens, a somber ceremony and a music without piano. Renoir is the first to walk in, Alicia behind him holding on to Verso's Esquier plush. Aline joins them, keeping her distance at first, before finally reuniting with her husband. Tears well up as they all look at the tombstone. Beloved Verso Dessendre, forever painted in our hearts. Claire reveals herself, watching from the side, in her hands a bouquet of red and white flowers. She takes a look at her family, all immobile, and takes action first, as always. While behind her, her parents still struggle to reconcile, she walks forward, exchanging a look with Alicia, and kneels before the grave, placing her flowers thereupon. She takes a moment to grieve, before returning to her place. Renoir finally extends his arm, and Aline accepts, returning the embrace. He takes her arm in his hand, pulling her in closer, and she takes his in hers, the two of them finally together. Claire glances at them, and, as if her task accomplished, walks away. Alicia still hasn't moved, her expression hasn't changed. Still holding on to the plush, she looks ahead, and all she sees is everyone. Verso, Lune, Ciel, Monoko and Esquier waving her farewell, Gustave beckoning her to join them, and herself, her other self, Maëlle, unmoving. The vision fades away, leaving her alone with the grave. Out of the two that are available to us, this ending is left the most open-ended. We are simply given a glimpse at the current state of things and the smallest of hints as to their possible evolutions. Verso's soul has been put to rest, the conflict between Aline and Renoir seems over for now, but although the road to healing is long, it is one they can finally tread together. With the canvas gone, there is no alternate reality to escape to, leaving the family free to properly grieve. But while Renoir seems the most advanced on that journey, and with his help Aline's is sure to progress, their daughters are not yet quite ready to embark on that path. Though she may appear otherwise, Clair has not yet moved on and is in fact very far from it. She is the first to walk away from the ceremony, walking to the left of the screen, to the past, back to her war. Even if she doesn't admit it, all her actions are byproducts of her brother's death. They are a way to ignore it, to hide and numb the pain, just like her mother. She has not yet started her process of grief. And Alicia is a special case. Before entering the canvas, one could interpret her behavior as the depression stage of grief. The death had sunk in, there is no denying that, but her life had lost its colors, her sorrow over her brother only further intensified by the guilt, the scars, the loss of her voice. These were things she could not escape, and the state of her family, one she felt responsible for, rendered any chance at moving on impossible. But within the canvas, she got to experience something else, another life, one where grief exists but where it doesn't completely obscure everything. The power she held within was undoubtedly too much for her, almost bringing her back to denial, but although it is one that was ripped away, it is one she did hold, proof that she can have agency. Watching her brother sacrifice himself for her again, twice, would be a heavy blow, but I think it allowed her to free herself from the idea that it was all her fault. Alicia's expression during this ending is difficult to read, but her attitude, despite being one of regret and sorrow, isn't one of guilt. I believe the lesson she learned from the canvas is that she can be selfish, she's allowed to want. Verso taught her that she can have the life she desires, even outside the painting. Her life as Maëlle will remain a part of her, and so will the memories. She is free to write her own path from now on. Her life may not be a blank canvas, but it is hers to paint. That particular lesson is one both her siblings helped her learn. At the cost of his existence, Verso gives her a new beginning, the likes of which he always believed in. And after Alicia conquers the Endless Tower, Clair gives her some advice. She shouldn't let other people's mess become her own. Make-believe is a drug she should resist, but still she shouldn't let fear dictate her life. It's not selfish for her to make her own decisions. She can be whoever she wants, she controls her life. All that matters is that it is one she enjoys. And although I think Alicia is clearly not there yet, I still believe Clair when she tells her sister that she has made great strides in that direction. Alicia will need support in her journey ahead, and with her father more preoccupied with her mother and her sister busy with other matters, the extent to which she will be able to have it is unclear. We do not know whether she and Aline will be able to reconcile, nor whether Clair will be able to turn away from her path of vengeance, nor whether either of them will be able to truly heal and move on. But at least now these possibilities all exist. Now there is a chance to grow, and we can finally hope. The colors in this real world may be more faded than they were in the painted fantasy, but they are certainly warmer. In the wise words of an unfinished bénisseur, grief is not a burden that needs to be carried alone. In the face of countless trials, families reunite, and they overcome. Chiaroscuro, Clair Obscur in French, can be defined in painting as the contrast created by the use of deep shadows and bright lights. Its results vary from a greater perception of depth and volume to shifting the overall tone of a composition. It is the ultimate expression of meaning through contrast, and there is a reason why this term was chosen as the title of the game. Such expression is found everywhere within. All during the first act we go from the sadness of the gommage and the terror of the dark shores, to the peace of the spring meadows and the beauty of the flying waters, to the gesture's goofiness and Esquier's joviality, then just as suddenly back to dread with the grim stone wave cliffs and the horrifying lampmaster. And this is not without purpose. Through tone we are meant to understand that something happened, grave enough to darken even the brightest lights. The very world itself, originally a place of joy, defaced with grief and horror, the playful childhood canvas turned into a tragic Clair Obscur, just like the painters that created it. Each of them is a being of stark contrasts. Aline's former cold exterior and her current emotional unraveling, the extent of Renoir's love and the scale of the death he brings, Clair's stern detachment and the deep anger and care that boil within, Verso's fun and the depth of his despair, and for Alicia, everything at once. But in a way, that is what life is. A mixture of bright lights and dark shadows, each complementing and completing the other. There is no joy without sadness, there is no sadness without joy. The existence of one allows to define the other. The characters each hold contradictory extremes within themselves, but that is what humanizes them the most. Humans are made of contradictions, emotion against reason, and even sometimes emotion and reason against themselves. The final choice is a false dichotomy. A middle ground could theoretically exist, but the game's very nature cannot allow it. Life keeps forcing cruel choices. This story speaks of grief, of love, of art, of reality, of selfishness, of growing up, of legacy, of letting go, of death and everything it entails. And among it all, it is our choices and our reasons for them that reveal who we are. And this clashing of extreme contrasts aptly concludes our tale. I would like to thank you very much for watching this video until the end. As I'm writing this, I have no idea how long it will actually end up being, but it's without a doubt my longest yet, and by far. It's quite different from my previous analysis in terms of style, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a like on this video, sharing it around you, and giving your thoughts about it in the comments down below. I've also recently opened a Patreon where you can support me financially directly. There you'll be able to access my videos in advance, as well as some of the random things that I do in my free time that don't really have a place anywhere else. There is no set topic or schedule for these benefits, but your support is greatly appreciated regardless. All links are in the description. I have to admit that when I started writing, I didn't really know what the video was going to look like. I had a rough idea at first. It was in a sense my way of saying goodbye to this game and this story. But as I went along and I allowed the text to grow and develop, the structure became obvious. For those of you who may not know it, I am a video editor, but as far as I can remember, I have always loved writing. And though my other analysis I found very pleasant to write, none were quite as fulfilling as this one. It's been a long time since I've been able to let my creativity and lyricism flow freely in my works, and given the artistic setting of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, I felt it was appropriate. The result is what I believe to be the most complete lore and analysis video about this game so far, so I'd say it was worth it. Plus, it's made by a French person, so that has to count for something. The inception for this video came from a simple thought inspired by one of the game's many enemies, namely the Lampmaster. Its placement within the story as the final boss of Act 1 effectively gave it a massive importance within the game, but I couldn't understand why, and why no one cared about it really. As I was questioning myself about the overall structure, I uncovered more and more things, and eventually came to the conclusion that the story we experience in the game's first 2 acts is in fact a condensed version of the story of Verso and the Dessendre family. The rest flowed naturally from there. The ideas I presented in this video aren't all my own. Some notions and theories were gleaned along my way in my research, not to mention the various mods I used for my footage. Therefore, this video isn't the fruit of my work alone. It was born from the dedication and the love of the community for this incredible game. Not that I didn't put any work myself, mind you, but I'm sure if you reach this point, you've already seen that at least. I did my best to portray as accurately as I could the intents, emotions and mindset of each character without depicting any single one as an irredeemable villain, but as you may have noticed, it was easier for some than for others. Aline, for example, though I don't think I failed her in this video, I can't help but feel like I didn't really do her justice, that I could have further developed her feelings and point of view. One that I didn't struggle writing at all, however, is Clair. Not only is she my favorite character in the game, but she's also the one I find myself relating to the most. The eldest daughter of 3, a compulsive creator, obsessed with perfection both from herself and from her art, burdened too young with too much, deeply caring but oftentimes callous in her form of love. That likely caused me to be more defensive and understanding of her, and to look beyond her tough exterior at the warmth I saw within, but that too was not without reason. The game in fact tells us as much. When we think about it, there was no reason for Claire to repaint the Endless Tower specifically for her sister to enjoy herself, other than the fact that she loves her. But while I think I did manage to develop Verso and Renoir relatively well, I know there are many more interpretations to Alicia's character than the ones I expanded upon. There are definitely many things I didn't notice or mention, or that I even got wrong about her arc and her themes. And on that topic, I do not claim to hold the definite truth, and you're entirely free and vindicated to disagree with things I've said. The bulk of this video was speculative, subjective interpretations, and though I believe I did find convincing enough evidence to support my points, that doesn't make them absolute truth, and it's very possible that any one of my claims will be contradicted by a later statement or update. Nevertheless, I hope I could make you think about Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and about its themes and story, and to have offered you new perspectives and connections you maybe wouldn't have thought about before. You can follow me on Instagram if you want to stay informed of my random life updates. Links are once again in the description. That's it for me this time. I'll see you around.